Chapter 665. At the same time that her body became hot, Shi Mingwan wrapped her arms around Zhang Hao's neck and looked into his eyes. She had long since discovered that Zhang Hao's eyes were darker than those of ordinary Asians. Most Asians' eyes had a hint of light brown in them. But Zhang Hao's eyes weren't. His eyes were pure black. They were like a pair of extremely beautiful obsidian eyes. Every time he was aroused, the color of his eyes would become deeper and deeper. Like a deep spring, she often couldn't help but indulge in it. Not only now but a long time ago, she liked to look at her dear brother's eyes. She thought that he was really her calamity. She could talk and laugh freely with difficult clients, and she could face her tricky grandmother with a strong attitude. She could even play tricks and make Xiang Kaiping happy. However, she couldn't be more at ease in front of Zhang Hao. Every time she saw him, she always felt at a loss. The face in front of her overlapped with that of her dear brother. Shi Mingwan couldn't help but call him dear brother again. Zhang Hao, who was trying his best to move on her body, became more and more aroused. In the end, he bumped into her until she couldn't speak anymore. When her consciousness shattered, she naturally couldn't call out the words big brother anymore. After Shi Mingwan told Qiao Zhe about it, she felt that what Qiao Zhe said before might be true. He really had something to do, so he left early and returned late. Because after that day, Qiao Zhe returned home early every day, had dinner with her, and woke up early for breakfast together. After the first month, the temperature in Lin City slowly rose. Shi Mingwan grew a little taller. She could no longer wear her previous clothes. In the past few months, some of the clothes she wore were bought by Qiao Zhe, and some were directly picked up by her. Her mother used to know how to make clothes and was the only tailor in the town at that time. Shi Mingwan watched her mother step on the sewing machine since she was young. Not to mention that she knew how to make clothes, she still knew how to simply change clothes and hold a needle and thread. Qiao Zhe also grew very fast. After the new year, he seemed to have grown a few centimeters taller. When he grew taller, he looked even thinner. Some of the clothes in the closet, such as t-shirts, shirts, and jeans, couldn't be worn anymore. Shi Mingwan took them over and made them smaller for herself to wear. Qiao Zhe once laughed at her. "Are you planning to be a tailor when you grow up?" "No." Shi Mingwan shook her head. "I don't want to be a tailor. I want to be a fashion designer." "Isn't he a tailor?" The young man had never come into contact with it before, so he started joking. Shi Mingwan was unusually serious. "No, a tailor is a tailor and a fashion designer is a fashion designer. I've checked both of them. This is different." The girl's eyes were clear and bright. She did not back down when talking about her dream. The youth stared at the clothes in her hands. However, he stopped mocking him. "All right. It was different. I'm waiting for you to be a fashion designer." Shi Mingwan's eyes curved with an obvious smile. "You trust me that much?" "Trust me." Just by looking at the stitches she had sewn and the clothes she had changed, there was nothing wrong with them. There was nothing for him to doubt. Shi Mingwan smiled, but that smile didn't last long. She thought of something else. Right now she was hanging out with Qiao Zhe every day. She didn't go home or go to school. Being a fashion designer was just a joke. She had to at least go back and finish her studies. But when she thought of Grandma Shi and the messy things at home, she didn't want to go back. "What's wrong?" The youth looked at her with a pair of bright eyes. When he met the sadness in Shi Mingwan's eyes, he seemed to understand something. "Do you not want to stay here anymore, dear brother?" Shi Mingwan was shocked when she heard this. "Are you trying to chase me away? If you don't want to stay, then go home. You're different from me." Shi Mingwan had parents. She only ran away from home in a fit of pique with her family. Qiao Zhe already knew about this. Shi Mingwan bit her lip and finally shook her head. "I don't want to go back. If you don't go back, how are you going to school? How are you going to be your fashion designer?" "I don't know." After all, she was only a little over 12 years old. How could she think about so much? "Dear brother, can you not chase me away?" The youth wasn't moved by her words. Instead, he was very serious. "You have to know that if you follow me, you might not be able to fulfill your dream." Shi Mingwan's expression was conflicted. She knew in her heart that what the youth said was true. But she looked at the youth. Under the light, the youth's eyes were as dark as ink, making people drown in them. "Dear brother, I won't chase you away." When the youth realized his feelings for her, how could he bear to chase her away? "But you have to think clearly. If you follow me, you won't have a good life. Not to mention the current environment, just what he was going to do in the future would probably be more and more dangerous." He couldn't say it clearly, but did she really understand? "I'm not afraid." Shi Mingwan still hadn't realized her subtle thoughts. She only knew that she didn't want to leave her dear brother just like that. So silly. Xiao Zhe looked at her and felt that the girl was a little silly. Shi Mingwan bit her lip and suddenly put down the t-shirt in her hand. She reached out and hugged Xiao Zhe. Dear brother, I want to follow you. I don't want to go back. Even if their life was actually quite hard now, even if she had nothing here, she had her dear brother. She didn't have an elder brother in the past. Although Father Shi treated her well, that feeling was different. Shi Mingwan's slender body was soft, and there was a faint fragrance of a young girl on her body. The youth's ears quietly turned red. He almost didn't dare to look at the girl. If you don't want to go back, then don't go back. It was just a few simple words, but he said them in an exceptionally stiff manner. Shi Mingwan didn't notice. She only felt that she was happy because the youth didn't chase her away. She was still too young to know why she was so happy. Shi Mingwan opened her eyes and felt a hand on her waist. The blanket had slid down a lot, but she didn't feel cold. The air conditioner in the room had been turned on at some point, but she didn't notice it. Following the hand, she saw that John Hauser was still sleeping with his eyes closed. She thought of the dream just now. The young man's thin but strong chest. She hugged him. He was clearly still very thin and weak. He was clearly just a young man, but he gave her a full sense of security. She looked up at John Hauser. The feeling he gave her was still the same, but she didn't know if this feeling was only given to her or to other women. She knew that this was because she was different from him. Gently taking his hand away, Shi Mingwan got up and went to the bathroom. When she left home before, Mother Shi was afraid that she wouldn't be able to take care of herself in Lin City alone, so she asked her to bring a lot of food over. Among them were dumplings and wontons that Mother Shi had personally made. They were all frozen and packaged. She told her that if she was too lazy to cook in the future, she could just cook them directly. Shi Mingwan looked at it and decided to cook wontons. She was very good at doing these things, so she cooked them very quickly. When John Hauser came out of the room, he saw two sets of wontons on the table, one big and one small. Shi Mingwan glanced at him. Let's eat. Her voice was very calm, without a trace of emotion. John Hauser sat down opposite her and looked at the wonton in front of him, which was almost twice as big as the one in front of Shi Mingwan. You eat. After you eat, I have something to tell you. Shi Mingwan felt self-loathing and disgust for being immersed in John Hauser's embrace again. She had conflicting emotions. On one hand, she couldn't control it, but on the other hand, she felt that it was inappropriate. Being conflicted on both sides would only make things difficult for herself. When John Hauser heard that, he paused in his action of picking up his chopsticks. He glanced at Shi Mingwan, but she lowered her head and didn't look at him. Mother Shi's cooking skills were very good, and the wontons she made were very delicious. It was different from the ones sold outside. Shi Mingwan's speed was very fast. She had the inspiration yesterday, and that feeling was still there today. She wanted to finish drawing her design in one go. After the new year, there would be a fashion design competition in France. She wanted to try it out. Although a small studio like theirs had almost no chance of winning such a competition, her teacher especially appreciated her and gave her an invitation. Behind the invitation was a design drawing. It was first sent to the other party's competition committee, and then the competition committee would pick out the shortlisted works from these works. If they were shortlisted, they would have a chance. There was still a month before the submission of the initial works for the competition. Shi Mingwan wanted to send the works that she thought of yesterday to the competition. She had something on her mind, so she ate very quickly. After finishing the wonton in front of her, she realized that John Hauser was still eating. She put down the bowl, sat up straight and looked at John Hauser seriously. John Hauser, after this breakfast, don't come again. John Hauser raised his head and glanced at her. Shi Mingwan didn't need him to speak, nor did she need him to respond. You have Qin Feifei. I don't want to be a mistress. Everything we did before was wrong. Yes, in this matter, I admit that I also have a responsibility. But I also paid the price. You didn't suffer a loss. So let's just leave it at that. Let's end it here. There are some things that you and I both know, so let's just leave it at that. When she faced John Hauser, her aura was always a little weaker. She didn't want to continue like this. She needed to end such a mistake. John Hauser didn't speak. Instead, he listened to her. He finished the rest of the wontons. He took out a tissue and wiped the corner of his lips. I've said it before. Qin Feifei isn't my girlfriend, nor is she my fiancée. Really? John Hauser knew that Shi Mingwan wouldn't believe him. There were some things that he couldn't say more about. She has nothing to do with me. I just treat her as a sister. You're not a mistress. After knowing her for so long, this was the most serious explanation John Hauser had ever given. Shi Mingwan looked into his eyes. For a moment, she was almost willing to believe that what he said was true. But it was only for a moment. You treat her as a sister. What about her? Zhang Haoze frowned. That's her business. Okay. Shi Mingwan skipped over this. Zhang Haoze, you said that Qin Feifei has nothing to do with you. What about me? Seeing that Zhang Haoze didn't seem to understand what she meant, she smiled. Qin Feifei has nothing to do with you, but what about me? In your heart, what am I? There was silence. Zhang Haoze looked at Shi Mingwan's face as if it was very difficult for him to answer. Why aren't you saying anything? Shi Mingwan sneered and looked at the troubled expression on Zhang Haoze's face. Zhang Haoze, I admit that I have feelings for you. But I definitely won't let myself be a mistress, and I won't let myself become so lowly in love. I didn't mean that. He had never looked down on her. You didn't mean that? You didn't want me to be a mistress. Or do you not think of me as a prostitute? Zhang Haoze frowned. I've said it before. I didn't mean that. Okay. I'll pretend that you didn't. Shi Mingwan stood up and placed her hands on the table. She leaned over and looked him in the eye. So you're serious about dating me? Zhang Haoze pursed his lips into a straight line and didn't refute her words. Zhang Haoze, can you marry me? Shi Mingwan leaned forward a little more and stared straight at Zhang Haoze's face. She was especially serious. Zhang Haoze, are you willing to marry me? Marry me. You know, after the new year I'll be 26 years old. I also want to get married and start a family with a man. Are you willing? Zhang Haoze was stunned for a moment. This time he was really silent. Shi Mingwan seemed to know the answer. She smiled and nodded. Look, you don't want to. There was no need to say anything else. Shi Mingwan took the bowl in front of him and cleaned up the bowl in front of her. She turned around and went into the kitchen. She cleaned up the kitchen in no time. When she came out, she saw that Zhang Haoze was still sitting at the dining table and hadn't moved. She didn't care. She went back to her room, changed her clothes, picked up her coat and prepared to leave. When she walked to the door, Zhang Haoze had already stood up from the dining table and walked in front of her. He didn't take any further action, but Shi Mingwan didn't mind continuing to speak more decisively. Zhang Haoze, the next time I come I'll call the police. You're considered a reputable person in Lin City now. I think you don't want to lose face, right? She picked up the car key and opened the door. More importantly, I believe that you don't want Miss Qin Feifei to know, right? The moment she was about to step out, Zhang Haoze suddenly reached out and grabbed her hand. Shi Mingwan was stunned for a moment. In the next second, her body was pulled into Zhang Haoze's arms. He lowered his head to kiss her. She avoided him. The coat in her hand fell to the ground, and she pressed her hand tightly against his chest. Zhang Haoze, don't always use this trick on me. I'm really not that cheap. Zhang Haoze was stunned for a moment. He watched as she picked up the coat and keys that had fallen to the ground and carried the bag on her back. Before Zhang Haoze could react, she had already stepped out of the door and left. She moved very quickly. When she walked outside, the elevator happened to arrive. She didn't care about Zhang Haoze and went straight into the elevator. Zhang Haoze didn't chase after her. Shi Mingwan heaved a sigh of relief, but at the same time she felt very disappointed. She already knew the answer to some things, and she also understood that there was no outcome between her and Zhang Haoze. But knowing it was one thing, accepting it and slowly digesting it was another thing. Leaning against the elevator mirror wall, she told herself that it was okay. It would pass, everything would pass. In the next few days, Zhang Haoze didn't come again. Since Shi Mingwan planned to participate in the fashion design competition, she naturally had to prepare well. She told herself to temporarily put Zhang Haoze at the back of her mind and focus on drawing. Occasionally when she was free, she would go to the hospital to accompany Xiang Kaiping. The studio was already on holiday. It was different from ordinary companies. For companies like them, the orders were all processed in advance. During the New Year period, there weren't many guests. Therefore, Shi Mingwan was quite generous and allowed her subordinates to rest until after the Lantern Festival before coming to work. The New Year was in 2 days. Hu Jingyao had something to do in Rong City, so he went back to Rong City first. Su Qingsang didn't go back because she had to take care of Xiang Kaiping. Her good friend had to take care of her mother in the hospital. Shi Mingwan thought about it and suggested that she come over to take care of Xiang Kaiping on the first day of the new year. However, she was rejected by Su Qingsang and Xiang Kaiping, especially Su Qingsang. She knew that Shi Mingwan usually didn't go home much, so she wanted her to hurry home for the new year. Shi Mingwan couldn't argue with Su Qingsang and Mother Shi kept calling her. In the end she went home. The new year in the small town was very lively. They started preparing a long time in advance. Father Shi was the eldest in the family. On New Year's Eve, Shi Mingwan's two uncles and an aunt would come to their house for a reunion dinner. Shi Mingwan's second uncle had 2 sons and a daughter. Shi Mingwan's third uncle also had 2 sons and a daughter. Shi Mingwan's aunt had 2 daughters and a son. In addition to her aunt, uncle and Grandma Shi, there were 2 tables full of people in the living room. Mother Shi was cooking in the kitchen, while Shi Mingwan went into the kitchen to help. Mother Shi chased her out a few times, but she wasn't willing to go out. She would rather sit under the stove and light the fire than see the pride on her second uncle, second aunt and third uncle's faces. Speaking of which, all these years, the 2 uncles and aunts always felt that they were superior to Mother Shi because they had sons. Shi Mingwan didn't like to be bullied. In fact, among the 3rd generation of grandchildren, be it the children of uncles or aunts, there was really no one like her who could open a studio at such a young age and earn money to buy a house. But so what? Just because she wasn't a son, no matter how well she did, she wouldn't get a good word from Grandma Shi. How ridiculous. Your grandmother is old. It's already 82 years after the new year. If she says anything, don't take it to heart. With the incident of Shi Mingwan's return last time, Grandma Shi hadn't mentioned it again recently. She only occasionally mentioned it in a strange tone. Mother Shi didn't plan to argue with her. After all, she was an elder. Got it? Shi Mingwan nodded, picked up a piece of firewood and threw it into the stove. She looked up at Mother Shi. Mom, how about I take you to Lin City to live? What nonsense are you talking about? Mother Shi didn't answer. What can we do if we go? We're used to staying in the countryside. It's not like we haven't been to Lin City before. It's not suitable for us. When Shi Mingwan's house had just been renovated and moved in, she had also asked Father Shi and Mother Shi to stay there for a few days, but the 2 of them weren't used to it. Later they came back. How is it nonsense? How is it not suitable? Look, you guys are still burning this earthen stove. How inconvenient. Everything is convenient in Lin City now. Besides, your daughter can earn money now. I'll support you guys. It's only right for you to support your parents. But I think that your parents will be happier when you bring the man you mentioned back. The sudden voice made Shi Mingwan turn around and look at the kitchen door. Grandma Shi stood at the door and sneered at Shi Mingwan. One girl, you said that you wanted to find a son-in-law. It's the new year. Where's your son-in-law? Shi Mingwan's expression didn't look good. Grandma, you still know that it's the new year? She clearly knew that it was the new year, yet she still said such words. It really made people uncomfortable to hear it. Yeah, isn't it the new year to get married? You said that you want to find a son-in-law, so why don't you bring that person over? Grandma is old, so I think your memory isn't very good. Didn't you say you would give me 2 years? It hasn't even been 2 months, right? Of course, Grandma Shi knew what she had said. But when she went back that day, the more she thought about it, the more she felt that she had fallen for Shi Mingwan's trick. What 2 years? She was already 82 years old. Who knew how many more days she could live? What if she died and this damn girl still hadn't brought him back? Who would care about the boss's business then? Mom. Mother Shi looked at Grandma Shi and was a little helpless. There's a lot of smoke in this kitchen. You should go sit outside first. Besides, it's the new year today and Wanwan is still helping me keep the fire lit. She's usually tired from work, so don't mention that for now. Do you think I like to mention it? Tired from work? So what if she's tired from work? Let me tell you, no matter how well a girl does, it's not as practical as finding a man to marry. Grandma Shi snorted at Shi Mingwan as she spoke, then turned around and left. Mother Shi knew that Shi Mingwan didn't like to hear this. She was afraid that Shi Mingwan would be unhappy, so she wanted to persuade her, but Shi Mingwan comforted her instead. Mom, don't worry. I'm not angry and I won't argue with Grandma. It was the new year and she would only be back for a few days. She didn't have the time to be angry with Grandma. Mother Shi looked at Shi Mingwan and thought about how she had been worried for the past half a month. She couldn't help but ask tentatively. Wanwan, do you have a boyfriend now? Mom, what are you thinking? How can I have a boyfriend? She hid her expression by putting firewood into the stove. She really didn't have a boyfriend, but she couldn't help but think of Jean Hausa. Jean Hausa hadn't come to look for her for the past few days. He must have gotten to know her clearly, right? Wanwan, I heard your uncle talk about someone last time. The other party's conditions aren't bad. I mentioned your request to her, but the other party didn't object. Why don't you meet him? Mom, was she asking her to go on a blind date? I'm serious. Mother Shi quickly explained, that person is from the county town. I heard that he's also working in Lin City. I heard that he's a manager. He has 3 sons, so he doesn't mind this kind of thing. Why don't you meet him? Mom, I'm not interested. But there aren't many who can agree to your request. Mother Sure scooped up the dishes and put them aside. She was really doing it for Sher Mingwan's sake. I think you can meet him. I heard that the boy is quite good looking. Really, will you consider it? Mom? Sher Mingwan looked at the anxiety and worry on Mother Sher's face. In the end, she sighed helplessly. Chapter 666. Sher Mingwan believed that even if she had met him, she wouldn't be able to get along. But with Mother Sher's attitude, she would just meet him. She would just treat it as reassuring her mother. Of course, it's just a meeting. It's not like I'm asking you to get married immediately. There's no such logic. Sher Mingwan's lips moved, but she didn't say anything else. She didn't want to say it anymore. Forget it, she would just treat it as an additional life experience. Otherwise, she hadn't even gone on a blind date before. Thinking about it this way, she wasn't so resistant anymore. Sher Mingwan didn't expect Mother Sher to be so anxious. She actually asked the man to come to her house the next day, which was the first day of the new year, to see her. Sher Mingwan was helpless and speechless. It was just that it was the new year. If he really came, she was too embarrassed to push him out. She thought about it and really didn't like such an atmosphere. She used the excuse of going to her former classmate's house for New Year's greetings to avoid it. It was one thing to agree to the blind date, but she felt that it was too hasty to meet the blind date just like that. She wasn't prepared at all. Sher Mingwan didn't have many classmates in the town. There were only 2 from junior high school. She went to the county town to study in high school. At that time, she had just returned home and felt uncomfortable staying at home. Later, she went to the county town to study in high school. She hid at her classmate's house and found that the 2 former classmates were already married and had children. They were clearly about the same age as her. One of the female classmates kept asking her when she was planning to get married. News of her had spread throughout the entire town. Father Sher was very capable when he was young. Mother Sher was also a famous tailor in the area. The couple had built a 3.5-story building in the town a long time ago. They were also one of the first to get rich. The Sher family was so famous that many people heard about Sher Mingwan's quarrel with Grandma Sher that day. Half of the people thought that Sher Mingwan was really amazing, while the other half thought that Sher Mingwan was dreaming. Which good man would agree to be your son-in-law? Would the child have to take your surname? Sher Mingwan couldn't hear the discussions of those people, so she didn't know that she had become the female lead of the rumors. When she heard her classmate ask her when she was going to get married, the first thing she thought of was Jean Hausa. Then she thought of the blind date that was coming today. She shook her head and didn't answer the other party's question, but she couldn't stay any longer. She went to 2 more houses to pay their New Year's greetings. In the end, she kept asking similar questions. Sher Mingwan lost her patience and slowly headed home. When he got home, the guests had already left. Mother Sher's eyes were a little complicated, but she didn't blame him much. She probably knew that her daughter had a knot in her heart. When she came back, her daughter ran out every day wholeheartedly wanting to find that big brother. Putting aside the fact that she couldn't find him under such circumstances, even if she found him, Mother Sher wouldn't agree to Sher Mingwan being with that boy. It was said that he didn't go to school and didn't have proper parents. No one knew what he was doing outside every day. But after so many years, even if his daughter didn't mention it, she probably still remembered it in her heart. 1-1. Mother Sher really wanted to persuade her. I've seen the person who came today. He was a nice person. He was the 3rd child in the family. This was a gift left behind by the other party. I knew you weren't home, so I didn't say anything. I only said that I could meet you again when I got to Lin City. Mother Sher took out her phone and sent a phone number to Sher Mingwan. This is the other party's phone number. He said he would contact you when he returned to Lin City. Don't blame me for giving him his phone number. Also, he said that his Weibo signal is also this. He said that if you're willing, you can add his Weibo message first and chat first. Mom? Sher Mingwan was a little impatient. When she met her mother's gaze, she forced herself to be patient and memorized the number. Okay, I got it. I think Shaoqi is really not bad. Think about it. Mother Sher gave a very serious suggestion. Sher Mingwan couldn't refuse her mother's kindness, so she copied down the other party's phone number. Sher Mingwan didn't stay at home for long. After staying for 3 days, she returned to Lin City. Firstly, she still wanted to go back to the studio to finish the rest of the work. Secondly, she still wanted to see Xiang Kaiping. Xiang Kaiping was still hospitalized during the new year. The first thing she did when she returned to Lin City was to see Xiang Kaiping. She was in good spirits and didn't seem to be affected by the injury at all. She saw that Su Qing Sang and Xiang Kaiping had a very good relationship. She also took good care of her. She was really happy for Su Qingsang. After having Xiang Kaiping, Su Qingsang was finally no longer a child without a mother. When she came out of the hospital, the weather was good. Shi Mingwan unexpectedly received a call from Xiao Qi. Xiao Qi was the blind date man. Shi Mingwan held the phone. The other party's voice sounded very gentle. Miss Shi, our company hasn't started work yet. I heard that you've already come to Lin City. When do you think it's convenient for you to come out and meet him in the next 2 days? The other party went straight to the point and didn't beat around the bush. Shi Mingwan thought for a moment and agreed to the other party's request to meet. The time was set for tonight. Xiao Qi knew how to set the mood and booked the dinner venue at a Western restaurant that had just opened. Shi Mingwan looked at the address. It was very close to where she lived. Mother Shi might have told Xiao Qi where she lived, but no matter what, if the other party had specially asked about it, it was considered thoughtful. She didn't have any resistance at first, but now it was a little less. It was still early, so Shi Mingwan didn't go home to change her clothes. She went to the studio and made a plan for the new year. She also revised her previous draft. After she was done, she realized that there were less than 15 minutes left to eat. She rushed, but when she arrived at the restaurant, she realized that she was still late. She took out her phone and was about to make a call when Xiao Qi sent her a location and a photo. The location was the restaurant he was currently at, telling her that he had arrived. The photo was the restaurant signboard. Below it were Xiao Qi's location, and there was also a selfie of him. This was the first time Shi Mingwan had seen this man. He looked gentle, and he seemed to be a very good-natured person. Shi Mingwan looked at the time. The other party had arrived a full 15 minutes earlier than her. She was a little embarrassed. She hurried into the restaurant and found a seat. Xiao Qi was already sitting in his seat with his phone in his hand. The moment he saw Shi Mingwan coming over, he stood up. He sized up Shi Mingwan, and there was an obvious flash of surprise in his eyes. I was just wondering if the photo I sent was too ugly, so you were so scared that you didn't want to appear. Shi Mingwan giggled. This Xiao Qi was a little interesting. How could that be? You should be thinking if it's because the photo you sent is too handsome that I feel ashamed of my inferiority, so I don't dare to appear. This time it was Xiao Qi's turn to smile. He reached out his hand to Shi Mingwan. Hello, I'm Xiao Qi. Hello, I'm Shi Mingwan. Shi Mingwan smiled and reached out her hand to him. This man might not be so repulsive. He walked out of his seat and pulled out a chair for Shi Mingwan. He returned to his seat and sat down, pouring Shi Mingwan a glass of lemonade on the table. Sorry, I haven't ordered anything yet. I don't know what you like to eat, so I could only wait for you to come. It's okay. I'm not picky. What Shi Mingwan said was true. After more than a year of wandering, she really ate everything. Other than a few foods that she didn't like, she really ate whatever she had. Xiao Qi called the waiter over and asked Shi Mingwan for her opinion. He ordered 2 identical steaks for the 2 of them. Miss Shi, what drink do you want? As he spoke, he smiled. If you like to drink, you can also have a bottle. However, I saw that you drove here, so you should drink a drink. I'll just drink juice. Shi Mingwan felt that this Xiao Qi was really a good person. He was very thoughtful. After Xiao Qi finished ordering, he returned the menu to the waiter. After the waiter left, he smiled. All right, even if you want a drink today, I won't order it. Why? I don't know how good your alcohol tolerance is. I'm afraid that you'll think that I deliberately forced you to drink. When the time comes, it'll be a little hard to explain. Shi Mingwan really smiled this time. My alcohol tolerance really isn't good. More importantly, it was really inappropriate for only the 2 of them to drink now. Xiao Qi nodded and looked at Shi Mingwan. Suddenly, his expression turned serious. I'm sorry. Did I scare you by coming here rashly? Shi Mingwan was a little embarrassed. Just as she was about to explain, Xiao Qi raised his hand. I was too rash. At that time, my mother asked me to go take a look, so I didn't think too much about it. I didn't expect it to cause you trouble and cause you to return to Lin City so early. It's none of your business. Shi Mingwan shook her head. I came back for something. That's good. Xiao Qi looked at her and confirmed that she really wasn't angry. I've already heard about your situation. I'll tell you about mine. I'm 29 years old this year. I'm currently working in a technology company. I'm currently the manager of the research and development department. At this point, he paused for a moment. Of course, this achievement is nothing compared to you setting up a studio at such a young age. There's no such thing. Shi Mingwan shook her head. I'm just lucky. She said this sincerely. Not long after she graduated, she set up her own studio. In addition to her own efforts, she also received help from her teacher and Su Qingsang. However, Xiaoqi was already a manager at such a young age, so he relied entirely on himself. Are we going to praise each other? Xiaoqi's teasing words made Shi Mingwan laugh, and she stopped arguing. I'm the third child in my family. My eldest brother and second brother are already married and have children. I'm the only one in my family who's still single. At this point, Xiaoqi picked up the cup in front of him and took a sip. My parents have always wanted me to get married, but I didn't have this idea before. On one hand, I still want to work hard in our company. On the other hand, I had a girlfriend before. Because it was a long-distance relationship, distance and time made it impossible for us to maintain it in the end, so I really didn't have this idea before. I know that Miss Shi is a new woman, but I feel that for a blind date like us, if possible, it's better to explain everything clearly. That would be better, don't you think? You're right. Shi Mingwan nodded. You're still thinking about your ex-girlfriend, so, no. Xiaoqi waved his hand. That part of it is already in the past. I'm telling you that I'm serious. I want to start a new relationship. So, I'm dating you on the premise of getting married. As for the conditions your family proposed, I don't disagree. Both of my brothers have sons. My parents have already said that I just need to be happy on my own. Xiaoqi's voice was neither fast nor slow, and his tone was as calm as usual. He was quite frank. He explained his situation clearly the moment he arrived. Seeing him like this, Shi Mingwan didn't know what to say. Miss Shi, do you not believe that I can do it? Xiaoqi put down the cup in his hand. Don't worry. Since I've agreed, I won't go back on my word. That's not what I meant. Shi Mingwan bit her lip, and a trace of hesitation flashed across her face. What I mean is that I basically understand your situation. But I might have to tell you about my situation. Go ahead. I'm 26 years old this year and I have my own studio. Shi Mingwan thought about what to say next. Before President Zhan? Xiaoqi exclaimed. His voice interrupted Shi Mingwan's words. The word President Zhan made Shi Mingwan's heart skip a beat. The moment Xiaoqi stood up, she turned around and looked behind her. When she saw the person who came, Shi Mingwan's heart skipped a beat. President Zhan. Xiaoqi walked out from his seat and greeted Zhan Haoze. What a coincidence. I didn't expect to meet you here. Yes. Manager Xiao is here too? It's indeed a coincidence. Zhan Haoze's voice was indifferent. He glanced at Xiaoqi, and his gaze seemed to sweep across Shi Mingwan without a trace. Eating with your girlfriend? Not for the time being. Xiaoqi, who had been talking confidently just now, smiled shyly. But I hope it will be in the future. As he spoke, he glanced at Shi Mingwan. Mingwan, this is our company's Zhan Haoze, President Zhan. President Zhan, this is my friend Shi Mingwan. Hello, Miss Shi. Zhan Haoze looked at Shi Mingwan and reached out his hand to her. Shi Mingwan sat there, her heart beating very fast. She had to use all of her self-control to prevent herself from revealing any clues. When she met Xiaoqi's gaze, she forced herself to stand up and reached out her hand to Zhan Haoze. Hello, President Zhan. She felt Zhan Haoze's hand pinch her hand so hard that she felt a little pain. Fortunately, he quickly let go. Shi Mingwan's hand hurt. She quietly placed her hand on her body, gently clenched her fist, and then relaxed. Xiaoqi didn't notice her small movements, but Zhan Haoze did. His gaze swept over the two of them. Are you guys on a date? At this moment, no one could tell the emotions in his pitch-black eyes. His voice was also indifferent, but Shi Mingwan could hear a storm brewing in his voice. Yes. Xiaoqi admitted it openly and looked at Zhan Haoze. Is President Zhan alone? Do you want to join us? This sudden invitation made Shi Mingwan widen her eyes and look at Xiaoqi. Was he crazy? No need. Your girlfriend will be unhappy. Zhan Haoze's voice was still indifferent. Xiaoqi suddenly remembered that he was on a blind date with Shi Mingwan. How could he let his boss sit down on a blind date? Then, I have an appointment with a friend. I'll go see if he's here. Then please. Zhan Haoze nodded slightly and glanced at Shi Mingwan. Finally, his gaze returned to Xiaoqi. Put today's expenses on my account. No need, President Zhan. How can I accept it? It doesn't matter. After Zhan Haoze said this, he turned around and left. He didn't look at Shi Mingwan again. Shi Mingwan felt her legs go soft. After Zhan Haoze left, she sat down on the chair. Her face was a little pale. Mingwan. Xiaoqi called her and smiled first. I'm sorry, I called you by your name without your consent. It's mainly because I think it's weird to call you Miss Shi. It's okay. Shi Mingwan didn't take this matter to heart. We're all young people. There's no need to be so particular. Then you can just call me by my name. Shi Mingwan answered casually and picked up the water on the table and drank it in one gulp. However, she felt that not only was the frustration in her heart not suppressed, but it was also getting more and more intense. I'm sorry, I just invited President Zhan to dinner like that. Please don't mind. I especially admire him. Xiao Qi's eyes lit up. Shi Mingwan had been entangled with Zhan Haoze until now. She had always known that his current achievements might not be low, but she really didn't know what he did. You said he's your boss? He looks quite young. Yeah, our boss isn't even 30 this year. He's very powerful. When he was in university, he invested in a piece of software. That piece of software earned him his first bucket of gold. No, in fact, I heard that his first bucket of gold was earned through investing in funds. Later, he invested in our company's first software. At that time, no one wanted that software, but he had a good eye for heroes and bought it at a high price. His entrepreneurial story is a legend in Lin City. Really? Shi Mingwan poured herself a glass of water and drank it to hide her loss of composure. I really can't tell. Yeah, not only does he invest in technology companies now, but he also invests in some new energy industries. But what's even more praiseworthy is probably his devotion. Devotion? Shi Mingwan didn't seem to understand. She looked at Xiao Qi. What do you mean? Have you heard of the Qin family? Although they aren't as powerful as the Li family and the Su family in Lin City, the Qin family isn't ordinary either. It's said that Miss Qin is indebted to President Zhan. That's why he's been guarding Miss Qin for so many years. If nothing unexpected happens, they'll be engaged this year. Xiao Qi looked in the direction where Zhan Haoze disappeared. Do you know? President Zhan has a company under his name to work on, but his workplace is still in the Qin Corporation. Doesn't this mean that he values friendship? Shi Mingwan couldn't tell what she was feeling. She bit her lip and clenched her fists under the table to prevent herself from revealing any emotions. He's really a loyal person. Her voice was very soft and it sounded like she was sighing. Xiao Qi looked at her and suddenly felt a little embarrassed. You probably don't like to hear this, right? I'm just too happy to see President Zhan. After all, we don't usually see him every day. It's okay. Shi Mingwan shook her head. Xiao Qi wanted to say something, but the waiter had already started to serve the food. Shi Mingwan fell silent as she picked up the knife and fork. She had never asked Zhan Haoze what he had been doing all these years. What was he doing? In the past, she felt that even if she asked, Zhan Haoze might not tell her. Later on, she didn't want to ask anymore. If he was willing, one day he would naturally tell her. But she had never thought that one day she would get all the news about him through someone else's mouth. She thought of Xiao Qi's words just now. Was he deeply in love with Miss Qin? Maybe it was true. Shi Mingwan didn't know what to eat during this meal. Xiao Qi said something else in the middle, but she only responded with a few random words. Until her phone rang. It was Mother Shi who was worried and called to remind her to remember to meet Xiao Qi. After hanging up the phone and not seeing Zhan Haoze again, Shi Mingwan heaved a sigh of relief. When facing Xiao Qi, her attitude finally returned to normal. Mingwan, do you have any other plans later? No. After Shi Mingwan answered, she remembered that she actually wanted to go home and rest. Since that's the case, why don't we go watch a movie? Xiao Qi said tentatively, during the new year there are a few movies that look good. Why don't we go take a look? Sure. Since she had already said it, Shi Mingwan had no reason to refuse. Moreover, it had indeed been a long time since she went to the movies. In the past, when Su Qingsang was free, she would follow Su Qingsang to watch it. However, recently Su Qingsang was in a car accident, so Su Qingsang wasn't in the mood to go out to the party. Then let's go watch a movie. Xiao Qi looked very happy. It was obvious that he was satisfied with today's blind date. Let's go. Xiao Qi brought Shi Mingwan outside. When she was about to pay the bill, she was told that Zhan Haoze had already paid for it. Shi Mingwan didn't even see when he left. Her heart beat faster again. What did Zhan Haoze mean? She told herself that it might be because Xiao Qi was his subordinate. But deep in her heart, she knew that wasn't the case. However, she could only force herself to divert her attention and not think about Zhan Haoze. Instead, she focused on Xiao Qi. Xiao Qi chose this restaurant because there was a cinema nearby. He suggested that since they were too full at night, they might as well walk there. Shi Mingwan didn't object. When they arrived at the cinema, Xiao Qi asked Shi Mingwan which movie she wanted. Shi Mingwan didn't know either. She saw that there were so many people in the cinema. It was the new year and the cinema was full. I'm afraid we can't buy tickets, right? At this moment, Xiao Qi took out his phone and waved it in front of her. I've already bought them. He said that he was worried that Shi Mingwan wouldn't be able to choose, So he even bought all the tickets for the 4 movies that were playing at this time. Shi Mingwan looked at Xiaoqi. She couldn't tell what she felt. This person was really attentive. In the end, the two of them chose a war movie that had a pretty good reputation to watch. The movie was a little noisy. From the beginning to the end there were gunshots. Xiaoqi was very engrossed in watching. Shi Mingwan was originally a little absent-minded, but she could only let herself be engrossed in the movie. Who knew that halfway through the movie her right hand would be held by someone? Chapter 667. The movie was a war movie. The sound of gunshots and bombardment filled the entire theater. Shi Mingwan subconsciously turned to look at Xiaoqi. He was very engrossed in the movie. She turned her gaze to look at John Hauser without a trace. He was staring at the screen in front of him as if he was focused on watching a movie. Shi Mingwan gritted her teeth and gently exerted force with her hand, wanting to pull it back. But his grip was so tight that she couldn't pull it back. If it weren't for the fact that the occasion wasn't right, she would have exploded. Just as she was about to lose control, John Hauser's hand finally let go of her. Shi Mingwan heaved a sigh of relief. She forced herself to focus on the screen, but that person's hand moved to her leg. The sudden touch on her thigh almost made Shi Mingwan jump up from her chair. She held back. She could hold back from jumping up, but she couldn't hold back the hand on her leg. Lin City was very cold in the first month. She wore a red woolen coat when she went out. However, the air conditioning in the theater was on. She felt hot not long after she sat down, so she took off her coat and placed it on her lap. The coat was very big. Jean Hauser's hand was touching her leg, but he didn't have to worry about anyone seeing it, because it was covered by the coat. Shi Mingwan couldn't put on the coat yet. She could only put her hand into the coat and grab his hand. However, Jean Hauser held her hand. Not only that, but his hand also began to move towards the direction of her leg. Shi Mingwan's face was red. Half of it was angry and the other half was embarrassed. She didn't expect Jean Hauser to be so bold. This was a movie theater. There were so many people around. Not only were there people all around, but Xiaoqi was sitting next to her. She put her other hand under the coat and wanted to grab his hand with both hands. Jean Hauser let her grab his hand. As she heaved a sigh of relief, he struggled slightly. Shi Mingwan gritted her teeth. She couldn't pay attention to the movie at all. Her mind was filled with the hand that was messing around on her body. She was so angry that she reached out and pinched the back of Jean Hauser's hand tightly. However, to him, her strength was like scratching an itch. No matter how much strength she used to pinch him, he refused to retract his hand. His actions made Shi Mingwan feel like her face was burning and her body was very hot. His heartbeat was out of control. Half out of fear, half out of shame. She didn't expect that Jean Hauser would really dare to mess around like this. She tried to grab his hand again, but his hand was pressed between her legs instead. Shi Mingwan's eyes were red. If it weren't for the fact that the occasion wasn't right, she would have screamed. She stabilized her body, and when the next gunshot sounded, she leaned a little in the direction of Jean Hauser. Jean Hauser let go. Jean Hauser didn't let go. Although they were separated by pants, it still made Shi Mingwan feel extremely ashamed. She lowered her voice, but she couldn't suppress her anger. Don't go too far. Jean Hauser's movement stopped for a moment, but he did not withdraw his hand. You, leave with me. Jean Hauser's voice was drowned out by the gunshot. He stuck close to Shi Mingwan's ear. Only they could hear each other's voices clearly. If you don't want me to do more, then come out with me. His breath was slightly warm and his voice was so low that it was almost a whisper. The theater was clearly very noisy, but she could hear it very clearly. No. She answered with some difficulty. She had agreed to go on a blind date with Xiaoqi, so she couldn't stand him up just like that. Jean Hauser's gaze was still on the movie screen, but his hand began to move towards the zipper of her pants. Although Lin City was cold, Shi Mingwan had never liked to wear too thick clothes. She was wearing a pair of casual pants today which weren't thick. As soon as his hand pulled open the zipper, it had already touched her lower abdomen. His fingertips were slightly warm, slender, and had a thin layer of calluses. He was very clear about the sensitive spots on her body, such as her navel. When his hand circled around her navel twice and wanted to go down again, Shi Mingwan was terrified. She grabbed his hand and her face turned pale from panic. Jean Hauser. She looked at him, then at Xiaoqi. At this moment she couldn't help but be glad that she had chosen this war movie. There were constant scenes of fighting, causing all of Xiaoqi's attention to be on the screen. Jean Hauser was unmoved and his fingers slid down again. Her voice was trembling. If that hand went down a little more, it would be. She gritted her teeth and pressed down on his hand, but she didn't know that this would increase the area where his hand came into contact with her. Shi Mingwan let go of his hand. She was simply afraid of him. I'll go with you. You go out first. Zhang Hao's movements finally stopped. He was still watching the movie, but he slowly pulled his hand out. He did it on purpose. He could have pulled his hand out in a second, but he had to pull it out bit by bit. Shi Mingwan's face was burning, and she felt like she was sitting on pins and needles. Zhang Hao's hand suddenly stopped. He placed his hand under her abdomen and moved his face close to hers. 5 minutes. As he spoke, he finally pulled his hand out. Shi Mingwan's legs went soft. She felt him quietly get up and leave. She felt weak all over and couldn't even stand up. She turned around and glanced at Xiaoqi. He was so engrossed in watching that he didn't notice her and Zhang Hao's movements at all. She rested for nearly 3 minutes before her body recovered a little strength. She zipped up her zipper again, but it took her a long time to do it. She felt ashamed. She closed her eyes and calmed down. At this time, the movie finally reached a relatively calm scene. She approached Xiaoqi. I'm going to the bathroom. Only then did Xiaoqi turn around and look at her. Okay. Shi Mingwan looked at him and felt a little apologetic. The other party was being honest, but she, gritting her teeth, she picked up her bag and coat and quietly left. When she walked out of the theater, her phone rang. 5 minutes are up. Looking at the words displayed on it, she turned around and searched around. She didn't see Zhang Hao, and her phone rang again. I'll give you 1 minute. Come to the parking lot. Shi Mingwan gripped her phone tightly and started to walk towards the parking lot. The theater parking lot was very big. She took a look and didn't see Zhang Hao. She closed her eyes and wanted to turn around and leave. A black Maybach quietly stopped beside her. Inside the car window was Zhang Hao's expressionless face. Get in the car. Shi Mingwan stood there and didn't move. Zhang Hao, I thought we had made things clear. I said get in the car. Shi Mingwan stood still. You have no right to ruin my life. Zhang Hao, please understand. Don't make me say it a third time. It was still the first month and the cold wind was blowing under the parking lot. Shi Mingwan stood there and refused to get in the car. Zhang Hao stared at her face for a while and suddenly got out of the car. Before Shi Mingwan could react, he had already walked in front of her. She had just come out of the elevator and was standing next to a pillar. Zhang Hao took 2 steps forward and she took 2 steps back. Her back was pressed against the pillar. You? This sudden question made Shi Mingwan unable to react for a few seconds. After realizing what Zhang Hao was asking, her little face flushed red. Pervert. You like it, don't you? Zhang Hao moved forward again. He raised his big hand and pinched her chin with his thumb and index finger. Do you believe that I'll continue here? Are you crazy? Shi Mingwan wanted to break free from his hand. At this moment, Zhang Hao moved his body forward a little and easily pressed her body against the wall. Or do you prefer to go back to the theater and continue? He leaned close to her face and placed his other hand on her waist without any hesitation. He easily placed his hand on the hem of her sweater. As long as he reached inside a little more, he could untie her pants. Do you want to continue? Shi Mingwan shook her head quickly. Her eyes were red. In terms of being a hooligan and shameless, she was definitely no match for Zhang Hao. However, Zhang Hao didn't retract his hand. He tilted his head and kissed her lips. His other hand gently brushed along the edge of her pants. Shi Mingwan's body trembled. She couldn't even make a sound after being kissed by him. His hand didn't go any further. He only used an extremely slow speed to slowly stroke her waist. Her legs felt weak and she almost couldn't stand. When Zhang Hao ended the kiss, her body had already completely softened. He quickly hugged her. He carried her horizontally, turned around and put her in the car. A movie in the theater was starting to end, and she saw someone get out. Zhang Hao left the parking lot before there were more people. Shi Mingwan spent more time than before to get her heartbeat and breathing back to normal. She looked at Zhang Hao, who was focused on driving, and thought that she had left Xiaoqi in the theater. She took out her phone and sent a message to Xiaoqi, saying that she had something urgent to attend to and had to leave first. Shi Mingwan was still thinking about how to explain to Xiaoqi when her phone was taken away. Zhang Hao took her phone away and put it into his suit pocket. You? Zhang Hao turned around and glanced at her. He stepped on the accelerator and the car sped up. Shi Mingwan didn't fasten her seatbelt just now, so she was shocked by his actions. She didn't have the time to care about her phone and quickly fastened her seatbelt. Zhang Hao's car sped out of the city in the night. Shi Mingwan didn't know where he was taking her. She resisted the urge to ask. She had no idea what he wanted to do now, and in fact she didn't want to know. She only knew that things between her and him were no longer clear. Zhang Haoze turned the car around and drove back. The car stopped at Shi Mingwan's apartment. Shi Mingwan picked up her bag and got out of the car. Zhang Haoze followed behind her. Neither of them spoke, nor did they open their mouths. They were silent all the way. She walked in front and he was half a step behind her. They walked all the way into the apartment. When they reached the elevator, Shi Mingwan's phone rang. The movie had ended. Xiao Qi couldn't find her. Zhang Haoze took out her phone and glanced at it. When she wanted to reach out to snatch it, he pressed down on her phone. Zhang Haoze, you? Zhang Haoze took a step to the side and pressed her body against the wall. What about me? Do you want me to answer this call for you? Crazy. How could she dare to let Zhang Haoze answer the phone for her? Shi Mingwan was extremely angry and reached out her hand at him. Return the phone to me. Zhang Haoze glanced at her. With a swipe of his long finger, he pressed it and directly turned off her phone. This person was simply a robber. Shi Mingwan turned around and didn't look at him at all. She pressed the elevator button. After the elevator arrived, she quickly entered. There were surveillance cameras in the elevator, so Zhang Haoze didn't go too far. She went upstairs and opened the door. Shi Mingwan wanted to close the door before Zhang Haoze came in, but her movements couldn't be faster than Zhang Haoze's. She put her bag aside and reached out to push Zhang Haoze. He easily restrained her hands, kicked with his long legs and easily closed the door. In the next second, her body was pressed against the door by him. All the movements were done in one go. Shi Mingwan gritted her teeth. She raised her foot and kicked at Zhang Haoze's lower body. Her movements were too ridiculous. Zhang Haoze easily blocked her foot, then stretched out his right foot and stuck it between her legs. Shi Mingwan couldn't even kick him now, nor could she resist. Her face was full of red. Zhang Haoze, let go of me. Let go of you and let you go on a blind date with another man? Can't I? Shi Mingwan was furious. Who are you to me? What right do you have to do whatever you want? Do you think I don't have a temper? Her bright red lips opened and closed as she spoke rather impolitely. Zhang Haoze narrowed his eyes slightly and grabbed her hands with his big hands. One of his hands unceremoniously wrapped around her waist and pulled her body into his embrace. He lowered his head and kissed her lips again. He kissed her very hard, and that strength was enough to make her lips feel pain. She was so angry that she opened her mouth to bite him. But before she could, he forcefully bit down on her lips. Shi Mingwan was in pain, but Zhang Haoze took this opportunity to successfully sneak in. In terms of methods, 10 Shi Mingwans weren't Zhang Haoze's match. She could only watch helplessly as he robbed her of her breath and took the initiative. She could even feel the taste of blood in her mouth. He actually bit her lips until they bled. He was simply a lunatic. She was so angry that she bit him back. She used a lot of force this time. She could feel that his lips had been bitten by her. The taste of blood in his mouth became stronger. She didn't know if it was his blood or hers. This was simply a battle. No one was willing to back down first, and no one was willing to admit defeat. Shi Mingwan was a woman after all. She quickly lost. When she was almost suffocated by his kiss, her legs started to go soft and she couldn't stand at all. He easily grabbed her waist and let her stand firm. At the same time, he finally let go of her as if he was kind enough to let her go. He hugged her waist and pressed his forehead against hers. There was blood at the corner of their mouths. Shi Mingwan's breathing was very heavy and urgent. She glared at him and didn't have the strength to struggle. Even if she struggled, he wouldn't let go of her. Chapter 668. Zhang Haoze happened to have his head lowered, and she bumped into Zhang Haoze's forehead. He was fine, but she couldn't stand the pain. Not only was it painful, but she was also dizzy. She couldn't stand steadily anymore. Her feet were soft. Zhang Haoze looked at her. Her forehead was already red. She didn't know if it was her imagination, but she actually saw a faint smile in Zhang Haoze's eyes. Crazy. She retreated her head and was so angry that she wanted to bump into him again. However, he easily avoided it and turned her body so that her back was facing him. Let go of me. Shi Mingwan's movements failed. After this, she felt more and more dizzy. Zhang Haoze suddenly hugged her by the waist and carried her to the room. Shi Mingwan was already very dizzy, and her head was even dizzier now that he was upside down. When her body was thrown onto the bed by him, the soft Simmons made her body bounce twice. Before she could get up, he had already pressed down on her. Zhang Haoze, go away. Her voice was a little hoarse. Before she could finish, he had already taken off her coat. He threw it on the ground beside him and then the sweater. The sweater was a pullover so he couldn't take it off at once. When he took it off, she pulled the hem with all her might. A good piece of clothing was torn out of shape. Shi Mingwan's hands were so tight that they turned white. Seeing this, Zhang Haoze easily grabbed her hand and raised it above his head. Just as she was about to tear him apart, he tore off the tie around his neck and easily tied her hands. He was very strong. She didn't know how he did it, but her expensive sweater was actually torn apart by him. "Pervert," Shi Mingwan cursed. Zhang Haoze sneered and stared at her face, which was red from anger. "Pervert? I should let you see what a real pervert is." Shi Mingwan watched as he tied her hands to the bed and became afraid. "Zhang Haoze, let go of me. Don't do this." Zhang Haoze was unmoved. He lowered his head and bit her lips hard. When she was in pain, he retreated a little. His lips landed on her cheek, bit by bit, and finally moved to her ear. "Didn't you call me a pervert? Today I will show you how perverted I am." Shi Mingwan still wanted to scold him, but soon she realized that she couldn't. 5,000 words are omitted below. Please fantasize by yourself. Shi Mingwan's eyes widened as she lay on the bed. There wasn't a single part of her body that wasn't sore, and there wasn't a single part that wasn't uncomfortable. This feeling was even more unbearable than the first time. His body was like a disassembled building block. It was difficult for him to even lift his hand. The bedsheet beneath him was already a mess. She felt terrible, but she couldn't even move to the bathroom. The man beside her had already gotten up and gone to the bathroom. Soon she heard the sound of water. She tried to turn over, but found that even such a simple movement made her waist very uncomfortable. "Pervert." Shi Mingwan gritted her teeth and gave up on getting up. Footsteps sounded behind her. She closed her eyes and refused to pay any attention to the bastard behind her. But at this moment, his body was carried by someone. Zhang Haoze. The moment Shi Mingwan said it, she realized how hoarse her voice was. That's enough. She couldn't come again. Zhang Haoze directly carried her into the bathroom. He turned on the shower and placed her under the shower. The warm water washed over her body, and she felt much more comfortable. The most important thing was that she really didn't have any strength now. If he didn't carry her to wash like this, she might not have the strength to stand firmly. "But, Zhang Haoze, what are your hands doing?" "Helping you shower." He answered expressionlessly, sounding very serious. "Nonsense." Shi Mingwan pushed his hand away. "I'll shower myself." "Are you sure you have the strength?" The hidden mockery in that voice made her angry. She tried her best to stand firmly, but she almost fell. He easily lifted her waist and held her steady. At the same time, he successfully made her body completely lean on him. Shi Mingwan was embarrassed and angry. Without waiting for her to completely stand firm, he lifted her body again. "Zhang Haoze." Shi Mingwan was frightened, and her voice sounded pitiful. "Just once." Shi Mingwan only realized after a long time that she was happy too early. This time it wasn't just once. It was clearly many times. The next day was the 5th day of the new year. Shi Mingwan spent it in bed. On the 6th day of the new year, she still tried it on the bed. Until the 7th day of the new year. For 3 whole days, other than eating and going to the toilet, Shi Mingwan bathed. After showering, she spent the rest of the time on the bed that she had custom-made for comfort. Zhang Haoze was like a madman. For the past 3 days, other than eating and sleeping, he hadn't stopped. Shi Mingwan had already given up struggling and resisting. The alarm clock rang. It was set by Shi Mingwan before. Other people could go to work after the 15th day of the first month, but she couldn't. But now, it was very difficult for her to think about it. As soon as the blanket was lifted, she could see the marks on her body. She gritted her teeth and cursed Zhang Haoze in her heart again. Then she gave up on getting up. She closed her eyes and forced herself to ignore the feeling in her body. She didn't even dare to say that Zhang Haoze had forced her. After all, if she said that he had forced her, Zhang Haoze had many ways to make her willing. He had indeed done it. He had used all means to make her beg for mercy. Shi Mingwan shook off the images in her mind. Any image that came to mind made her feel ashamed. Shi Mingwan reached out to look for her phone. Her phone had been turned off by Zhang Haoze for the past few days. She turned on her phone. There were countless text messages and dozens of missed calls. Other than one from Su Qingsang, the rest were all from her family in Shaoqi. It didn't matter if Shi Mingwan didn't return Su Qingsang's call for the time being. However, she couldn't ignore Mother Shi's call. Just as she was about to call Mother Shi, she remembered her current state. In her current state, her mother would definitely be able to tell that something was wrong if she spoke. She thought about it and decided to contact her family later. It didn't matter if Mother Sure called later, but looking at the dozen or so calls and text messages from Xiaoqi. After thinking for a while, Shi Mingwan called him back. Xiaoqi. As soon as she called, Shi Mingwan realized that something was wrong. Is it Mingwan? Xiaoqi picked up the phone almost immediately. Are you okay? I'm fine. Shi Mingwan tried her best to make her voice sound normal. Unfortunately, she had been screaming too hard these past few days, and her voice was almost hoarse. Your voice doesn't sound good. Are you really okay? I'm fine. Shi Mingwan shook her head and swallowed her saliva. I'm really fine. I might just have a cold. So, have you been sick these past few days? Xiaoqi's words made Shi Mingwan not know how to reply. She paused for a while and cleared her throat. Yes, I fell sick when I came back that day. Because she was lying, she felt especially guilty when she said this. Xiaoqi didn't hear it, but he heard her weakness. Is it very serious? How are you now? Have you taken your medicine? I heard that your voice is very hoarse. Do you cough? Do you need me to take you to the doctor? The series of words of concern touched Shi Mingwan a little, but she was only touched. No need. I've taken my medicine. I might be fine in 2 days. Sorry I was rude. Xiaoqi's voice on the other end of the phone softened. If you don't want me to see you, then I'll call an ambulance for you. Your voice really doesn't sound right. There's really no need. Shi Mingwan shook her head. After realizing that the other party couldn't see her, she tried to raise her voice. I probably haven't been sick for a long time. So I can't take the sudden cold. I've taken my medicine. I'll be fine after a nap. But you should have been sick for a few days, right? Xiaoqi paused. Do you know? I couldn't get through to you these past few days, so I thought you didn't want to see me. Xiaoqi. I think you ran away halfway through the movie that day. I thought I wasn't your ideal type. You were going to reject me in this way. That's not what I meant. Xiaoqi was indeed not her ideal type, but she didn't want to hurt him. I'm sorry, Xiaoqi. I really had something to do that day. You mean I still have a chance, right? Xiaoqi. Shi Mingwan didn't want to lie to him. She knew very well that Zhang Haoze had left and returned, and she was entangled with him again. She didn't have the right to develop a relationship with Xiaoqi now. It's okay. If you're not ready, I can give you time. Shi Mingwan didn't know what to say. Do you know? I've seen you before. Xiaoqi's voice stunned Shi Mingwan. She had no impression of him. Speaking of which, you're considered a celebrity in our town. I've seen you before. Xiaoqi sighed on the other end of the phone. I knew you'd forgotten about me. But I've never forgotten about you. Xiaoqi. Shi Mingwan couldn't answer him. All right, I'm not trying to burden you. Take care of your health. I'll ask you out when you're better, okay? Shi Mingwan was still thinking about how to reject Xiaoqi when a big hand suddenly appeared on her waist. She was shocked. If it weren't for Xiaoqi on the other end of the phone, she might have already screamed. Even so, she sucked in a breath of cold air. What's wrong? Xiaoqi could tell that something was wrong with her voice. Don't tell me you're not even willing to give me such a chance? No. Shi Mingwan's body was lifted up by Zhang Haoze, and he easily held her in his arms. She wasn't wearing clothes, but he was. His hand was holding her waist, and at this moment, his big hand was moving down her waist. You? She glared at Zhang Haoze, her eyes full of accusation. Then you're willing to give me this chance? Zhang Haoze was unmoved. He turned his face and kissed her cheek. She didn't know where he had gone this morning. His lips were very cold. Shi Mingwan grabbed his hand with her hand to prevent him from doing anything rash. At the same time, she had to divert her attention to listen to Xiaoqi's phone call. Xiaoqi, I'm very sleepy. I want to sleep. It's okay. I said that I'll contact you when you're better. Xiaoqi's voice sounded cheerful. Shi Mingwan responded randomly. She thought that the other party was going to hang up, but Xiaoqi added. You didn't let me come to see you, so you wasted a chance for me to be attentive. Shi Mingwan was stunned for a moment. Xiaoqi smiled on the other side of the phone. I'm not lying to you. My cooking skills are not bad. Now that you're sick, I originally wanted to come over and perform well. Xiaoqi. Alright, I'm just joking. Next time. If you don't mind, I'll cook for you next time. Okay, Shi Mingwan felt Zhang Haoze's hand on that soft spot. She tried her best to make her voice sound normal. Then next time. All right, next time. Xiaoqi was satisfied. This meant that he still had a chance. Then have a good rest. See you later. Okay. See you later. Shi Mingwan was a little embarrassed. Almost as soon as she hung up the phone, she immediately turned around to look at John Hauser. She didn't care about the weakness in her body and pulled John Hauser's hand away. She glared at him with indignation. John Hauser, are you done? Her voice was hoarse and her body was weak. These few simple movements were enough to make her pant, especially her waist, which was uncomfortable and sore. John Hauser stopped for a moment. He stared at her face. His eyes were deep and there seemed to be a hidden storm in them. Make an appointment with Xiaoqi next time? You want to eat his cooking? You're eavesdropping? Is this eavesdropping? Xiaoqi spoke so loudly, did he still need to eavesdrop? Rascal. I thought you already knew. Jean Hauser's big hand was placed on her waist, and the threat in his eyes was obvious. Shameless. Jean Hauser hugged her waist closer again. He moved closer to her, and the distance between the two of them was less than 5 centimeters. Do you believe that I can be more shameless? Of course she believed it. She had already felt it in the past few days. Shi Mingwan gritted her teeth and tried her best to retreat a little. John Hauser, what do you want? Jean Hauser stared at her face for a long time, his long and narrow black eyes gloomy. Stay away from Xiaoqi. Shi Mingwan was so angry that she almost laughed. Why should I? Jean Hauser looked at her appearance. She had been through too much these few days. She looked a little haggard, but it didn't hurt her beauty. On the contrary, other than her beauty, there was also a sense of tenderness. Jean Hauser approached her again and sneered. Do you believe that I'll transfer him to the South Africa branch? Shi Mingwan was stunned for a moment. She still didn't understand. Jean Hauser added. Our company doesn't have a branch in South Africa yet. I think Xiaoqi wouldn't mind being the first person. Are you threatening me? Threatening? If you want to think that way, fine. But I think this is a kind reminder. Jean Hauser reached out and pinched her chin. His eyes were filled with malice. If you don't want to harm him, you should know what to do. Shi Mingwan was so angry that her chest rose and fell violently. She bit her lip hatefully and raised her head to glare at Jean Hauser. Jean Hauser, don't go too far. After saying this, she felt that it was ridiculous. It wasn't like she only found out today how outrageous he was. Chapter 669. The room was very quiet. Jean Hauser and her eyes met, and they both saw their own shadows in each other's eyes. Shi Mingwan's face was pale and her expression was haggard. Her lips were slightly swollen. Her eyes were filled with unwillingness, anger and conflict as she stared at him in pain. Jean Hauser slightly missed her gaze and didn't look at her. His silence in Shi Mingwan's eyes meant that he didn't want to let her go. She couldn't help but reach out and grab the front of his clothes. Tell me. Jean Hauser, what do you want to do for you to let me go? It had only been a few days, but she felt mentally and physically exhausted. She had always been weak in front of him and she had never been able to be tough. She hated herself for being like this, but she couldn't control herself. As long as she met him, as long as she encountered something related to him, she would become different from herself. She had clearly made up her mind to get rid of him. She had clearly thought that she had made it clear to him, but what was he doing now? There was still a wound on her lips. He had bitten her a few days ago. He had forgotten to control his strength when he had lost control, and her injury hadn't healed yet. He raised his hand and gently caressed her lips. His movements were very light, but Shi Mingwan slapped his hand away. Jean Hauser, answer me. What do you want to do for you to let me go? Tell me. She was really angry. She didn't care about her exhausted body and kept pounding on his chest. To him, that kind of strength was almost like a cat's paw scratching an itch. Before Shi Mingwan could react, he picked her up and put her on the bed. Jean Hauser, Shi Mingwan's voice was about to turn hoarse. She didn't have any more strength to resist Jean Hauser. She was angry, so she simply closed her eyes and let him be. He could do whatever he wanted. If he didn't want to let her go, what could she do? Jean Hauser found some clothes, picked her up and put them on for her. Then he carried her to the bathroom. Her feet indeed didn't have any strength at all. Jean Hauser supported her and let her lean against his chest. He squeezed the toothpaste for her. Putting the toothbrush in her hand, Shi Mingwan looked at Jean Hauser in the mirror. She took the toothbrush and brushed her teeth as if she was venting her anger. She used so much force that her gums were bleeding. Jean Hauser frowned and gently grabbed her hand. Shi Mingwan stopped for a moment. She looked at Jean Hauser's face in the mirror, and he was also looking at her. In the end she was defeated. She loosened her grip a little and brushed her teeth carelessly, then rinsed her mouth. She wanted to say something, but Jean Hauser picked her up again. This time he carried her to the dining room outside. There were many small plates on the dining table, filling it to the brim. There were barbecued pork buns, egg tarts, shrimp dumplings, steamed shumai, beef tripe, beef meatballs, salt and pepper duck chin, steamed chicken feet with black bean sauce, spring rolls, fried dough sticks, and steamed buns. There were 2 cups of soy milk and 2 bowls of shrimp porridge on the side. Shi Mingwan looked at Zhang Haoze. He put her down and pushed one of the bowls of shrimp porridge in front of her. You? Shi Mingwan didn't know what to say. She saw the marks on these butterflies. This was a very famous Hong Kong-style tea restaurant nearby. That restaurant's business was very good, and because business was so good, it never delivered takeout. And with so many, don't tell her that Zhang Haoze brought it back himself. Eat. Zhang Haoze's voice was indifferent. Shi Mingwan didn't have a chance to speak even if she wanted to. She looked at the bowl of steaming porridge and didn't move for a long time. Do you want me to feed you? Zhang Haoze's long and narrow eyes raised slightly. Shi Mingwan shrunk her neck. Her mind thought of some of the discordant scenes of the past few days. She didn't dare to let him feed her. She picked up the bowl of porridge and found that such a simple action made her hands a little sore. She couldn't help but glare at Zhang Haoze again. Before he noticed, she looked away. The porridge tasted good. She had been to this tea restaurant with Su Qingsang before. At that time, she felt that it would be great if the other party was willing to deliver takeout every day. That way she wouldn't have to wait in line. She could order takeout earlier and eat before going to work. However, the people inside said that because business was too good, even if there was takeout it wouldn't be delivered, so there wasn't any. Now that she looked at the table full of breakfast, she didn't know how Zhang Haoze did it. She didn't have a big appetite, but she hadn't eaten well for the past few days. For 3 days in a row she ate takeout. It was the new year and many shops were on holiday. She didn't have much choice. Zhang Haoze was tormenting her again and she was really hungry. Shi Mingwan, who had eaten more than usual, put down the bowl and looked at Zhang Haoze in front of her. She couldn't understand him more and more now. Zhang Haoze didn't eat slowly, but he didn't look rough. He took a big bite, but he chewed slowly. His behavior could even be considered elegant. She thought of what Xiao Qi had said before. He said that Zhang Haoze had founded several companies over the years and had done a lot of things. She had always known that he was an ambitious man. But his achievements today still made her feel a little surprised and shocked. Thinking about it carefully, it seemed very normal. She remembered that he had nothing back then. But he could always conjure something at the critical moment. For example, money, food. For example, the expenses that the two of them needed. She remembered that time when she changed his clothes. His coat was too thick and she couldn't do anything about it. In the end, she could only sew the sleeves a little shorter so that she could wear it as a thick coat. However, because it was too thick, she accidentally pricked her hand. Xiao Zhe, who didn't notice what she was doing, snatched the clothes from her hand in the next second, as well as the needle and thread. The youth put her index finger into his mouth. Shi Mingwan looked at his handsome face and felt a little embarrassed. I'm fine. She said that, but the youth didn't let go of her. His gaze was fervent and there seemed to be flames in it. Unfortunately, Shi Mingwan was too young at that time, so she didn't understand at all. The youth let go of her but didn't let her touch the needle and thread again. Shi Mingwan thought to herself, how could she not touch it? Their lives weren't very good now. Although his clothes weren't completely suitable for her to wear after he changed them, and they were even a little ugly. But wasn't it enough to keep out the cold? Her thoughts at that time were that simple. She thought that after Xiao Zhe left home, she would continue when he wasn't around. The youth brought back 2 sets of brand new clothes the next day. Not only did the youth bring her clothes, but he also brought matching shoes and hair accessories. There were 3 or 4 sets of clothes inside and outside. Although they weren't branded, she wasn't ignorant at that time. She knew that these clothes weren't cheap. Where did you get them? At that time, the youth held her hand and told her, Wan, trust me. I won't let you suffer. Shi Mingwan didn't know that it was a promise. She blinked her eyes. She naturally believed the youth's words. Dear brother, Wan, as long as you follow me, I won't let you suffer. Give him time, he would definitely let her live a good life. That was the youth's promise. Although he was young and immature, he was extremely serious. The chair beside Shi Mingwan was pulled away by someone. She was shocked. When she came back to her senses, she realized that Zhang Haoze had already finished eating. He had actually taken care of so many things. Once again he picked her up and placed her on his lap. What were you thinking about just now? He asked. Shi Mingwan bit her lip and couldn't answer Zhang Haoze's question. Zhang Haoze turned her body around and looked her in the eye. His eyes were dark, and Shi Mingwan couldn't help but think of the youth from back then. It was also the same eyes, and it was also the same serious and solemn expression. But what he did was the complete opposite of what Zhang Haoze did. Zhang Haoze pinched her chin again, and his brows were tightly knitted. He seemed to be very dissatisfied with the fact that she was always distracted by his side. This time Shi Mingwan didn't grab his hand. She even bravely raised her head to look at him. "Zhang Haoze, I'm thinking about you." She held his cheek with her hand and stared at his face. "I'm thinking about you." Seeing his slightly furrowed brows, she reached out her hand and gently smoothed it. "I'm thinking, why do you want me? I'm thinking, what do you mean? I'm thinking, what do I have to do for you to let me go?" Meeting Zhang Haoze's eyes, which had become even deeper, she gently raised the corners of her lips. "Zhang Haoze, can you tell me?" She had already said it several times today, but he hadn't given her an answer even once. Zhang Haoze loosened his grip on her chin and pulled her hand away. However, he didn't answer her question. "Zhang Haoze." Shi Mingwan held his face again. This time her gaze was very serious. "In your heart, am I a prostitute?" Zhang Haoze's expression suddenly became quite ugly. "Shi Mingwan, if you don't treat me like a prostitute, then why are you treating me like this?" Shi Mingwan really couldn't understand. The dear brother she liked, admired, and had always been thinking about shouldn't be like this. She stared at him, stubbornly wanting an answer. Although the home clothes she was wearing were thick, they were designed with a large round collar. She held his face like this, and her hands moved forward so that her neckline could be seen clearly in front of him. The green and purple marks on it were all left by him. It also reminded him of how crazy they had been these few days. Zhang Haoze felt his body stiffen, but he knew that the other party couldn't take any more. His gaze shifted to the side again. "Zhang Haoze." He wanted to avoid it, but Shi Mingwan didn't give him a chance to avoid it. "Shaoqi is a blind date arranged by my parents. I'm 26 this year. Perhaps I'm not considered old among the unmarried girls in Lin City. But in our town many girls of my age are already married and have children. She wasn't someone who followed the crowd, nor was she someone who followed the crowd. She said so much today because that person was Zhang Haoze. How other people's lives are has nothing to do with me. But I can't ignore my parents' thoughts. If you don't treat me like a prostitute, then can I treat it as if you also have feelings for me? At least you like me a little and care a little, don't you?" As long as he had feelings for her, she could wait and persevere. Zhang Haoze's face was turned straight by her again and he looked at her. Her eyes were fervent, and the light in them made the room lose its color. Compared to him she was undoubtedly brave. At least in terms of feelings she was much braver than him. The air was silent and Zhang Haoze was silent. Shi Mingwan's eyes darkened and she retracted her hand. "Zhang Haoze, you can go." No matter how much she loved him, she wouldn't lose her dignity and rationality. She wouldn't lower herself to this extent. She retreated a little and her gaze was cold. She was about to get up and leave, but Zhang Haoze reached out and hugged her before she could leave. He wrapped his arms around her tightly and hugged her tightly. "Zhang Haoze." Shi Mingwan heard his heartbeat. Her voice was very hoarse but the words she spat out were quite clear. "Don't be like this." Zhang Haoze didn't let go. He grabbed her waist tightly and pressed his chin against her neck. His body was a little stiff as if he was enduring it. "Zhang Haoze, let go of me." She didn't struggle. She no longer had any strength. In 3 days she had almost exhausted all of her strength. "Shi Mingwan." That person finally spoke. His voice was a little hoarse. He called her name. He pressed her face tightly against his chest. When he spoke she could even hear the vibration of his chest. "Give me some time." Shi Mingwan looked up at him. His pitch-black eyes were also looking at her at this moment. She couldn't understand the emotions in them. "Give you time? What time? The time to marry me?" Shi Mingwan's tone was a little mocking. She didn't believe Zhang Haoze's words. Zhang Haoze stared at her face and actually nodded. Shi Mingwan looked at him. For a moment she couldn't tell what she felt. "Zhang Haoze, give me time," Zhang Haoze said again. Shi Mingwan lowered her eyes. She heard the sound of her heart beating. It was the desire in the depths of her heart. She really wanted to marry her dear brother and spend the rest of her life with him. The anticipation in the depths of her heart made her not even have time to think about more realistic problems. You really? If she didn't like him, she naturally wouldn't be so worried about gains and losses. But if she liked him and fell in love with him, there was nothing she could do. It was impossible for her to act according to her own subjective will. Zhang Haoze looked at her and nodded. Shi Mingwan was very excited, but the more excited she was, the calmer she appeared. She just stared at John Hauser and he was also looking at her. Shi Mingwan blinked and tried to calm herself down. How long? Seeing that John Hauser didn't say anything, he only frowned slightly, as if he was in a difficult position. Shi Mingwan smiled bitterly. You can't make me wait forever, can you? She didn't believe in the saying that a woman's youth was limited, but she had her own problems right now. She couldn't ignore Grandma Shi's 2-year period. Looking at Grandma Shi's body, it wouldn't be a problem for her to live to 100 years old. At that time, if she didn't bring a man back, what would happen to Grandma Shi? John Hauser, tell me, how long do you want me to wait for you? There was silence. John Hauser's thin lips pursed into a straight line. He looked like he was in a difficult position. Shi Mingwan felt that she couldn't continue the conversation. She thought that she had already done everything a girl could do. What else did John Hauser want? John Hauser. She forcefully got up from his arms and took a big step back. Her feet were still a little soft. Such a simple action made her feel uncomfortable in the place that she couldn't tell others about. She gritted her teeth and forced herself to ignore the feeling in her body. You can go. John Hauser held her hand before she wanted to go back to her room. It won't be long. It won't be long? Shi Mingwan really wanted to ask him how long would it be. But she couldn't ask. She looked at John Hauser. His eyes were like a deep spring. She was deeply immersed in them. She was once again pulled into his arms. He lowered his head and kissed her gently. He wasn't as rough as he had been these few days, nor was he as overbearing as before. He kissed her gently, bit by bit, and he carefully traced the shape of her lips. The strong John Hauser would make it impossible for Shi Mingwan to refuse, but such a gentle John Hauser made Shi Mingwan confused. She slowly closed her eyes and allowed herself to be intoxicated by his kiss. He finally retreated a little when she was almost suffocated. He pressed his forehead against hers. His breathing was also a little heavy and a little breathless. Give me some time. His voice was slightly hoarse as he uttered those words in an extremely soft voice. Shi Mingwan looked into his eyes and finally nodded weakly. Her body was carried by him again, but he didn't go to the room. Instead he went to the living room. Do you want to watch a movie? John Hauser asked her. Shi Mingwan blinked at him. Although she didn't understand what he meant, she still nodded. She got up and chose a movie called Life is Beautiful. Shi Mingwan had seen this movie before, but it had been too long, so she had forgotten many of the plot. The film festival played very slowly, and she slowly recalled the plot along with the movie. Her eyes were a little red. When she saw Guido take a very ridiculous step and die under the muzzle of Na Chui, Shi Mingwan's eyes fell. There was a tissue in front of her. She took it and wiped her tears away. She sniffed and found that John Hauser was staring at her. She suddenly didn't want him to see her like this. She turned her face and continued to focus on the plot. The movie ended very quickly, but her emotions didn't come out of that kind of environment. Her body was turned around by John Hauser. He raised his hand as if he couldn't understand the change in her emotions. Why are you crying? Don't you feel touched? John Hauser looked at her expressionlessly and didn't say anything. There was no need to say anything to know that he probably didn't feel anything at all. If you're not touched, why did you say you wanted to watch a movie? John Hauser turned his gaze away and picked up the remote control to watch another movie. Shi Mingwan seemed to have realized something. You didn't say you wanted to watch a movie because Xiao Qi asked me to watch a movie yesterday, did you? John Hauser turned around and glared at her. Soon he looked at the screen again. However, Shi Mingwan clearly saw that his earlobes were slowly turning red. This realization stunned her for a moment. She bit her lip. For a moment she thought that there was something wrong with her eyes. Are you jealous of Xiao Qi? Shi Mingwan asked subconsciously. In the next second she saw that John Hauser's earlobes were even redder. At this moment, John Hauser turned around and glared at her. His gaze looked very fierce. Shi Mingwan seemed to have discovered something extraordinary. She still wanted to say something. However, John Hauser kissed her lips. It was a kiss that was rougher than before, not giving her a chance to speak. Shi Mingwan blinked her eyes. There was a faint smile in her bright and beautiful eyes. They were extremely bright like stars in the sky. However, John Hauser raised his hand to cover her eyes and deepened the kiss. Bit by bit, his lips stole her breath and occupied it. His hands also started to be dishonest. Shi Mingwan wanted to get rid of his hand, but he pushed her down on the sofa and covered her eyes with the silk towel she had used before. When her eyes couldn't see, her senses would become especially sharp. The weather was still cold. Shi Mingwan bit her lip. Not here. The man seemed to want to punish her for mocking him just now. Not only did he not let go of her, but he also firmed his determination to do it here. She couldn't resist, so she could only dance with him. At night, Shi Mingwan, who was sleeping on the bed, righteously rejected Zhang Haoze and didn't let him continue. She had really been tortured by him too much these few days. If he continued, her waist would definitely break. Zhang Haoze stared at her face for a long time, but in the end he really didn't continue. He hugged her waist and pressed his chin against the top of her hair. The lights in the room had already been turned off, leaving only a bedside lamp. Shi Mingwan's back was facing Zhang Haoze. She looked at the small lamp and her voice was very soft. Zhang Haoze. He didn't respond, but Shi Mingwan knew that he wasn't asleep. Don't you need to go to work? It was already past the 7th day of the Chinese New Year. Normally speaking, many companies would have already started work. No need. Because he was lying down, his voice sounded a little hoarse, but it was especially sexy. You? Shi Mingwan thought of what Xiao Qi said. You're starting a company now? Yes. Pretty good. She still remembered the young man who had nothing more than 10 years ago. At that time he said that he had to earn a lot of money and that he would give her a good life. Does your company make money? Yes. That's good. Shi Mingwan nodded gently. At this moment he turned her body around and let her face him. She looked up at him. Can you tell me about you? She wanted to know more about him, such as where he had been all these years and what else he had done other than starting a company. Didn't he have no home or parents? Then how did he go to university? She had a lot of questions to ask, but Zhang Haoze pressed her face against his chest. Sleep. Zhang Haoze, if you don't sleep, I'll do something to make you want to sleep. Shi Mingwan's face was a little red, so she really didn't ask. If he didn't want to tell her, she wouldn't ask. When he wanted to tell her, she would ask. She sighed slightly in her heart. She didn't open her eyes. Instead, she rubbed her face against his chest. Zhang Haoze. Yes. 2 years. What? I'll wait for you for 2 years. Shi Mingwan's voice was very soft. She already wanted to sleep. These few days she really didn't have much time to sleep. She didn't hear Zhang Haoze's response and she didn't need his response. If you can't marry me in 2 years, I'll find a random man to marry, she said. Zhang Haoze stared at her face, but she seemed to be completely asleep and didn't make a sound. After a long time, her steady breathing could be heard, confirming that she had really fallen asleep. 2 years. Chapter 670. Shi Mingwan, who had slept well the night before, was in good spirits when she woke up in the morning. She decided to visit Xiang Kaiping today. She had been with Zhang Haoze for the past few days and hadn't gone out. When she woke up in the morning, breakfast was already on the dining table. Zhang Haoze was in charge of Shi Mingwan's 3 meals these days. She knew that he didn't buy it, but she felt the same in her heart. The rebellious young man only knew to wait for her to prepare breakfast and wake him up to eat. Zhang Haoze was outside the balcony, seemingly answering a phone call. She couldn't hear what he was saying. She wanted to go over and ask, but Zhang Haoze had already hung up. Shi Mingwan looked at his suit and leather shoes. This suit didn't seem to be left with her before. She knew that he woke up very early every day. Did someone send it to him? Are you going out today? To work. Zhang Haoze sat down at the dining table. That word could be considered an explanation. Shi Mingwan sat down opposite him. She looked at his expression and thought of something. Then will you come back tonight? Zhang Haoze's hand that was picking up the chopsticks paused for a moment. He glanced at her, then nodded. Yes. Shi Mingwan didn't even notice that her eyes lit up because of Zhang Haoze's word. Then you should be early. I have nothing to do today anyway. I'll go buy ingredients to make dumplings in the afternoon. After dinner, Zhang Haoze went to work. Shi Mingwan looked at the empty room and for the first time, a real smile appeared on her face. Now let's leave it like this for now. This is also good. She cleaned up the dishes and went to the bathroom to get Zhang Haoze's clothes, intending to wash them. However, when she saw his clothes, she realized that Zhang Haoze's clothes needed to be dry cleaned. She washed her own clothes and tidied up the house. Shi Mingwan carried Zhang Haoze's clothes downstairs and went to a nearby dry cleaner to wash the 2 sets of clothes that Zhang Haoze had left there. Then she went to the hospital to accompany Xiang Kaiping for a while. After the 7th day, Su Qingsang had already started work. The hospital she stayed in was the largest hospital in Lin City, so Su Qingsang was very busy. Shi Mingwan didn't expect that Xiang Kaiping would actually want to introduce her. She found a good doctor in the hospital. Speaking of which, Shi Mingwan had seen that man before. He used to pursue Su Qingsang. Although Su Qingsang didn't know anything about it as a bystander, how could Shi Mingwan not know that the persons Wu Hongqin liked was Su Qingsang? She was so frightened by Xiang Kaiping that she even refused to have lunch with Xiang Kaiping. She was afraid that if she stayed any longer, Xiang Kaiping would ask Su Qingsang to bring them over. That would be really embarrassing for her. After leaving the hospital, she received a call from Su Qingsang. Su Qingsang couldn't stop laughing. "Don't worry, my mother just said it casually. She was too bored staying in the hospital." "I know. But your mother is really too passionate. I can't take it anymore." He was so concerned about her personal problems that she was under a lot of pressure. "It's better if you can't take it," Su Qingsang said half jokingly and half seriously. "Maybe you'll really meet your true love?" Qingsang. "All right. I won't tease you anymore." Su Qingsang had always known about the knot in her heart. "But I really think that you should stop waiting for that big brother of yours. It's been so long. He's too unreliable." Qingsang. Shi Mingwan wanted to say that it wasn't unreliable at all. She had already met him now and they were very close. But Su Qingsang wouldn't believe that. She was also too embarrassed to say it. "All right, I'm just saying. You still have to rely on yourself." Su Qingsang had tried to persuade her many times, but she had stopped a long time ago. It was just a casual mention. After hanging up the phone, Shi Mingwan was a little lost in thought. Unreliable? Thinking about it seriously, it was true. Zhang Haoze didn't say that he wanted to marry her, and he didn't confirm her identity. Now that they were like this, it felt a little shameful to talk about it. After all, Zhang Haoze didn't seem to be willing to reveal her identity now. She really looked like she was going to throw herself at him. What she said before she fell asleep yesterday was true. 2 years. She gave Zhang Haoze 2 years and she also gave herself 2 years. In 2 years, if she couldn't move Zhang Haoze to marry her, then she would give up. But before that, she always wanted to give herself a chance. She had waited for more than 10 years and searched for more than 10 years. When she thought there was no hope, she found it and met it. No matter what the final way out for her and Zhang Haoze was, whether it was a calamity or fate, she would accept it. At least she didn't want to regret her youth. She looked at the blue sky above her head. The weather was really good and she was actually in a good mood. No matter what, she had waited for her dear brother. This result was already very good for her. There were some things that she wouldn't regret as long as she tried her best. Qin Feifei sat in Zhang Haoze's office. She looked at Zhang Haoze's position with unfriendly eyes. She had been waiting for Zhang Haoze for half an hour. But Zhang Haoze still hadn't appeared. She stood up and walked outside looking at Lu Xian who was sitting outside. "Where did Zhang Haoze go? Don't tell me you don't know?" "Miss Qin, I really don't know." "You don't know?" Qin Feifei sneered. "If you don't know, then how did you become a secretary?" Lu Xian stood there and bent down to listen to Qin Feifei's temper. That attitude made Qin Feifei even angrier. She stood up and pointed at Lu Xian. "Tell me, where did Zhang Haoze go?" Lu Xian had seen Qin Feifei's appearance in front of Zhang Haoze. She was like a completely different person. He lowered his back and looked very respectful. "Miss Qin, although President Zhang is my boss, he really doesn't need to report everything to me. So it's normal that I don't know where he went." Qin Feifei stood up and stomped her feet angrily. She turned around and went to Qin Yongchang's office. Qin Yongchang had just returned from a meeting. As soon as he entered the office, he saw his beloved daughter looking unhappy. "What's wrong? Who made our baby angry?" "Who else?" Qin Feifei stood up. "Or is it Zhang Haoze? He hasn't been home for days." As she spoke, she went forward and hooked Qin Feifei's hand. "Dad, what kind of work did you give Brother Hao? Look, it's not even the 15th yet and he's already so busy." Qin Yongchang looked at Qin Feifei with a complicated gaze. He only said for a moment, "Don't be too willful. You know that I've arranged work for Haoze. When he's done, he'll naturally come back." "Dad, I just want him to accompany me. You're not allowed to arrange any more work for him. Look at you. I've really spoiled you." After Qin Yongchang finished speaking, he patted her hand. "Don't forget that Haoze is not only in charge of our company's business, but also his own company's business. Speaking of this, I'm even angrier." Qin Feifei pouted. "Isn't our family's company big? Brother Hao still wants to open a company outside. You shouldn't have agreed to let Brother Hao open a company outside." Qin Yongchang glared at Qin Feifei. "Zhang Haoze is talented. Even if I don't agree with his ability, do you think he won't open a company outside?" Back then, Zhang Haoze had only just graduated from high school, and he had already asked him to borrow money to invest in a fund. At first he was unwilling, but he didn't expect that he had misjudged him. John Hausa actually had that kind of ability. In one summer vacation he had earned his first $1,000,000. Later, his wealth had increased by leaps and bounds in the past few years. If it weren't for the fact that the Qin family still owed John Hausa a debt of gratitude, he felt that John Hausa might really have left the Qin family. Dad, besides, Dad is doing it for you. A hint of calculation flashed across Qin Yongchang's eyes, but it appeared so quickly that Qin Feifei didn't see it. Do you know how much John Hausa's technology company is worth now? Do you know how much the website he invested in is worth now? All of this will be yours in the future. Qin Feifei bit her lip and looked at Qin Yongchang worriedly. Dad, I don't want any company. I just want Brother Hao to accompany me. Nonsense. Qin Yongchang glared at his daughter and realized that his attitude was too harsh. In the end he softened his tone. Feifei, let me tell you, John Hausa is too scheming. I'm just afraid that you'll suffer a loss. Then why don't you ask Brother Hao to marry me as soon as possible? Look, a grown girl can't be kept at home. Do you really want to get married as soon as possible? Don't you want to accompany Dad for a few more years? Dad, if I marry Brother Hao, he'll still live at home in the future. Not only can I accompany you, but you'll also have a son. Qin Yongchang smiled. All right, you can go. Leave this matter to Dad. Don't worry, I'll definitely get your Brother Hao to marry you. Dad is the best. Qin Feifei kissed Qin Yongchang on the face before turning around and leaving. After she left, Qin Yongchang called his secretary, Little Wang. Secretary Wang, check where John Hausa has been these few days. Yes. Secretary Wang left. Qin Yongchang thought about his plan and picked up the phone to dial another number. Before Shi Mengwan bought it home, she really went to buy the ingredients to make dumplings. When she returned home, John Hausa hadn't returned yet. She went into the kitchen, put everything away and tidied up. The dumpling skin was ready-made and sold. She just needed to mix the stuffing. It wasn't too difficult for her. After washing the vegetables and chopping the stuffing, she couldn't help but think of her dear brother again. That year they spent the new year together. That was their first year together. The winter in Lin City was especially cold, but it didn't snow. Near the bungalow Shi Mengwan and the others lived in, there was a young couple from the north. The two of them couldn't go home for the new year, so they started to prepare for the new year early. Shi Mengwan happened to pass by and saw it, so she felt that she should also prepare. Dear brother, can we also make dumplings for the new year? Make dumplings? The young man who returned home took off his coat. When he heard this he frowned. You know how to? A little. Shi Mengwan nodded. I saw my mother make dumplings before and helped. However, I didn't do it myself. It's too troublesome. Don't do it. It's the new year. Everyone eats dumplings. Eating dumplings makes it more festive. Let's go. How about we go buy the ingredients? The young man couldn't win against Shi Mengwan, so he followed her to pick the ingredients. When Shi Mengwan really wanted to do it, she realized that it wasn't as easy as she thought. Usually, it was very easy to see her mother do this, but now that she bought the ingredients herself, she realized that it was very difficult. The stuffing was fine. She learned to mix it and it would be fine. It was either a little salty or a little bland. However, the dumpling skin made Shi Mengwan a little difficult. In the past, it was Shi Mengwan's mother who mixed the dough at home and she helped her. However, it was her first time rolling the dough skin herself. When she really kneaded the dough skin into a ball, she realized that it was very difficult to roll the dough skin into thin slices. She tried several dumpling skins but they all failed. They were either too thin or too thick. The young man crossed his arms in front of his chest and looked at her movements. He sneered. Are you sure you can? The young girl was very embarrassed. She had never been so embarrassed before. I'll try again. I'll definitely be able to do it. The young man looked at her mockingly. Forget it. If you don't know how, we'll eat something else today. No, I definitely will. Shi Mengwan was very stubborn. Today was New Year's Eve. Wasn't New Year's Eve supposed to be eaten with dumplings? However, Shi Mengwan tried again, but the result was actually too thin. It actually broke. Her face was red. I don't believe I won't succeed. She was a very stubborn person. She stubbornly decided that she had to succeed. He picked up another ball of dough and tried again. This time he didn't know why, but he actually pressed down on his hand. The young man looked at her actions and reached out to take the rolling pin in her hand. Let me do it. Shi Mengwan looked at the young man. She couldn't believe that he actually knew how to roll dumpling skins. Are you joking? Let me do it. I'll just try a few more times. The young man didn't even raise his head. He picked up the small ball of dough and pressed it with his palm. Then he copied Shi Mingwan's actions and started rolling it. The first one was too thick and failed. The second one was too thin and failed again. Shi Mingwan bit her lip. While she was still thinking about how to not hurt the young man's third dumpling skin was already done. Here. Shi Mingwan looked at the dumpling skin and for a moment, she thought that there was something wrong with her eyes. Dear brother. She picked up the small dumpling skin. Have you rolled it before? No. The young man's hands didn't stop moving. He had mastered the trick and his movements were fast and good. Shi Mingwan was speechless. The young man felt her gaze and raised his head slightly. What? Aren't you going to wrap it? Yes, I'll wrap it. Shi Mingwan felt that this was simply unfair. She picked up the very even piece of dumpling skin and looked at the young man's movements. How did you know? I knew it from watching you do it. Shi Mingwan's pretty face was full of dissatisfaction. I've also seen my mother do a lot. The young man glanced at her. You're short. Because she was short, she couldn't exert strength, or it wasn't easy for her to exert strength. Shi Mingwan almost choked on her own saliva. How am I short? Although she was 13 years old, she was already more than 1.5 meters tall. She wasn't considered short among her peers at all, okay? Her gaze fell on the young man, and she lowered her head dejectedly. Alright, compared to Qiao Zhe, she was indeed short. After the new year, Qiao Zhe had grown a lot taller. Now he was probably 1.8 meters tall. She was very depressed, but her hands didn't stop wrapping the dumplings. She didn't know how to roll dough, but she still knew how to make dumplings. After all, she had helped a lot at home in the past. Just like that, one of them rolled the dumpling skin and the other made the dumpling skin. Unexpectedly, their movements were very fast. It was getting late in this small house with nothing. The two young men and women wrapped the dumplings together. Halfway through, Shi Mingwan glanced at Qiao Zhe. Dear brother, do you have coins? Why do you want coins? Wrap them in dumplings. Whoever eats them later will be very lucky next year. The young man glanced at her with a hint of mockery in his eyes. Superstition. How is it superstition? Isn't it all like this? Shi Mingwan bit her lip, thought for a moment and shook her head. No. Coins are very dirty. Let's use peanuts. Previously they had bought some snacks including a bag of peanuts. Shi Mingwan ran over and peeled 2 peanuts. She took out the peanuts inside and wrapped them in 2 dumplings. She looked up at Qiao Zhe. Dear brother, I'll wrap 2. There are 2 peanuts in each. This is a pair. When the time comes, we'll each have a pair of peanuts. This way our luck will be very good next year. The young man didn't think much of it and his eyes were filled with disdain. Shi Mingwan was in high spirits. After wrapping them, she placed the 2 in the middle of the dumplings. I'll mess them up. When the time comes, it'll really depend on luck. She said it excitedly, as if she would be able to get 1 for each of them as she thought. After wrapping it, Shi Mingwan took the dumplings and put them into the pot. Big brother, wait a moment. There will be dumplings to eat soon. While cooking the dumplings, Shi Mingwan didn't forget to stir-fry 2 dishes. Usually they wouldn't be so extravagant, but today was New Year's Eve. No matter what, they should at least have some New Year's atmosphere, right? The dumplings were cooked and the dishes were served. The steaming hot dumplings made people feel much better. Big brother, have some dumplings. Shi Mingwan's dumplings were pretty good. Although they weren't as exquisite as the ones sold in restaurants, they were all very plump and well-proportioned. Qiao Zhe glanced at her, picked up a dumpling and took a bite. How is it, big brother? How does it taste? The young man glanced at her and nodded in affirmation. Then he lowered his head and continued eating. Shi Mingwan tasted one and felt that it was not bad. She laughed. Dear brother, my skills are not bad? I think we can open a dumpling restaurant. I'll be in charge of making the dumplings and you'll be in charge of rolling the dumpling wrappers. How about that? The young man stopped eating the dumplings and looked up at her. Didn't you say you wanted to be a fashion designer? Shi Mingwan's expression was awkward for a moment. Then she said with a matter-of-fact expression, then we can open a dumpling restaurant first. After we earn money we can go learn fashion design. The young man didn't say anything and just quietly ate the dumplings. Dear brother, there's more inside. More. It's the new year today. The young man was halfway through eating when he picked up a dumpling. He seemed to have bitten something hard and his movements froze. What's wrong? Shi Mingwan suddenly perked up. You ate peanuts? That's great. Dear brother, your luck will definitely be very good in the future. Qiao Zhe didn't believe this at all, but very quickly he ate a second peanut. Dear brother. You ate peanuts again? You're so lucky. Shi Mingwan's eyes were pure congratulations without any reluctance. Qiao Zhe was stunned for a moment, but he put the remaining peanut into Shi Mingwan's bowl. Here. Big brother? Didn't you say that my luck would be good? I will share my good fortune with you. Shi Mingwan's eyes immediately turned red. Dear brother, let's eat. The young man was a man of few words. Shi Mingwan lowered her head to eat, but tears fell without warning. Big drops of tears fell into the bowl. The youth was stunned for a moment. You? Shi Mingwan bit her lip and couldn't say anything. In this half a year she could force herself not to miss home and her family. But today was New Year's Eve. At this time he couldn't help it. No matter how unreasonable her grandmother was, she still had her mother, father, and her younger sister who was only a few months old. She had been away from home for a few months, and she didn't know how her sister was doing. She also didn't know if her parents would still think of sending her sister away after she left. She missed her mother even more. When she left home, her mother had just finished her confinement. She could still help her mother at home, but if she wasn't at home, who would help her mother with the housework? The more she thought about it, the sadder she felt. The more she thought about it, the more she missed her family. Tears would fall as if they were free. The youth rarely saw Shi Mingwan cry. Since the two of them knew each other, most of the time Shi Mingwan was cheerful and sunny. It was rare for her to be like this. He looked at her and suddenly got up to get the bag of peanuts. He took out 2 peeled ones and placed them in Shi Mingwan's bowl. What good luck or bad luck? I think it's all the same. Shi Mingwan was still sad just now, but when she saw the youth's actions she burst into laughter. Dear brother. She didn't mean that. I don't want to eat lucky dumplings. She sniffled and didn't dare to face the youth's eyes. I just miss home. She wiped the tears in her eyes and looked at John Hauser. I miss my father, my mother, and my little sister. The youth looked at her, a little dazed. His brows were tightly furrowed as if he had thought of something. If you really miss home, then go back. Shi Mingwan looked at him and suddenly shook her head. No, I'm not going back. She missed home very much, but she couldn't go back. She was very afraid that if she went back, her parents would send her little sister away again. Dear brother. Shi Mingwan wiped the tears in her eyes and looked at John Hauser. What about you? It's the new year today. Don't you miss your parents? The youth's expression could be considered gentle just now, but his face was suddenly stained with a layer of gloominess. At this moment, his eyes were filled with malice and malice. My father and mother are both gone. This was the first time Shi Mingwan had heard John Hauser mention his parents after being together for so long. She was stunned. Looking at the indifference in the youth's eyes, she felt a stabbing pain in her heart. She suddenly reached out and hugged the youth. It's okay, dear brother. From now on, I'll be your family. The youth didn't say anything. This was the first time Shi Mingwan took the initiative to hug him. He lowered his head to look at her. The young girl had just come out of the kitchen, and there was still the smell of smoke on her body. He really felt like a family member. He reached out to hug the young girl. The youth didn't say anything. Family? This feeling seemed pretty good. Chapter 671. Shi Mingwan had already made more than half of the dumplings. She was very quick at wrapping dumplings. Strangely, after so many years, she had never learned how to roll dumpling wrappers. He never would. At home, Mother Shi was the one who rolled the dough. She only needed to wrap it. She was afraid of trouble when she went out, not to mention that there were ready-made dumpling skins for sale now. You're back? Dinner will be ready soon. The kitchen was very small, so Shi Mingwan made dumplings on the dining table. The stuffing was mixed in a large basin, and 2/3 of it had already been wrapped up. Jean Hauser stepped forward and watched Shi Mingwan's movements. She had a pair of extremely beautiful hands. Her fingers were slender and smooth. She wrapped the dumplings very quickly and looked very pleasing to the eye. Jean Hauser pulled out the chair in front of the dining table and sat there watching Shi Mingwan make dumplings. Shi Mingwan felt uncomfortable under his gaze, and her hands stopped moving for a moment. What happened? Seeing that Jean Hauser didn't speak, she pouted and said, Will you? Do you need help? I won't. Those 3 words were spoken in a low voice. Shi Mingwan knew that he wouldn't, so she stopped looking at him. She quickly wrapped the dumplings and put them away. Then he went into the kitchen to boil water. When the water boiled, she found the cured meat and sausages that Mother Shi had asked her to bring to Lin City before she came back. She calculated the portions, cut them, and then stir-fried 2 dishes. When she took the dishes out of the pot, she found that Jean Hauser had been staring at her at the door. The corners of Shi Mingwan's lips curled up slightly. Wait a minute, the dumplings will be ready soon. As she spoke, she handed one of the dishes to Jean Hauser. Please take it out. Jean Hauser didn't expect her to ask him to serve the dishes. He stared at the dishes in her hand for a few seconds and finally reached out his hand. There's also this. Shi Mingwan smiled and glanced at the processing table. Jean Hauser placed the dishes on the table outside. Shi Mingwan looked at the dumplings. They were ready to be cooked. She scooped out the dumplings and brought them to the dining table outside. All right, bring 2 bowls over. Jean Hauser had already sat down. Because of Shi Mingwan's words, he glanced at her and finally got up to get the bowl. Shi Mingwan had a faint smile in her eyes. Some things required a sense of participation. This was her home. Jean Hauser was now her man. She had to let him feel a sense of participation. There were many things that required 2 people to do together in order to improve their relationship. She hoped that their relationship could be enhanced outside of the bed, not just in bed every time they had an exchange of feelings. Seeing Jean Hauser sit down with the bowl, Shi Mingwan put the dumplings into his bowl. How about trying it? Jean Hauser tasted one, looked up at her and nodded. Shi Mingwan's eyes turned red because of his reaction. However, this time she controlled herself and didn't let herself lose her composure. She lowered her head and ate the dumplings quietly. My mom made this. So is this. Actually, when she was with dear brother back then, Shi Mingwan had also thought of getting some New Year's goods. But at that time she was really too young to know. She couldn't now either, but she could let him taste her mother's cooking. Shi Mingwan made a lot of dumplings. It's only half cooked. She put the rest in the freezer so that she could cook it the next time she wanted to eat it. And the food she cooked all went into Jean Hauser's stomach. She really couldn't help but sigh. His appetite was really good. After dinner, Shi Mingwan cleaned up the kitchen. When she came out, Jean Hauser pulled her to sit down on the sofa. His hand was on her waist and he held her in his arms. Shi Mingwan felt a little uncomfortable. She was too full, and Jean Hauser's actions made her feel dangerous. Jean Hauser, how about we go for a walk? She grabbed his hand away. Shi Mingwan really didn't want to do such exercise right after dinner. It was too tiring. We're too full tonight. We should go for a walk to digest our food, don't you think? Jean Hauser's hand was still on her waist. Shi Mingwan wasn't confident that he would agree to her request, but no matter what, she had to give it a try. Let's go. Go for a walk? Jean Hauser stood up. Shi Mingwan was happy. She went to get her coat. She had already gone out today and her coat was hanging at the entrance. She took the keys and phone and put them in her pocket. She looked at Jean Hauser with shining eyes. After going downstairs, Shi Mingwan felt a little regretful. The sun was out during the day and the temperature in Lin City was still okay. She could still tolerate it. But it was night now and Lin City was near the sea. The wind was strong and the temperature was low. A gust of wind blew over and Shi Mingwan couldn't take it anymore. So cold. Why was it so cold? She seemed to have heard the weather forecast that it would cool down again, but she didn't expect it to be so cold. She reached out and rubbed her palms. Just as she was about to put her hand back into her pocket, Jean Hauser reached out to hold her hand and put her hand into his pocket. His hand was very big and it tightly wrapped around hers. Shi Mingwan's mind flashed for a moment. Looking at Jean Hauser's deep profile, she bit her lip and couldn't help but feel a trace of joy in her heart. She knew that her dear brother was like this. She moved her face closer to Jean Hauser's arm and rubbed it. The smile on Shi Mingwan's face became brighter. Jean Hauser felt her movements and turned to look at her. He didn't say much, but the expression on his face became much gentler. The next day it rained in Lin City. When Jean Hauser left the company, he received a call from Qin Yongchang saying that something had happened to Qin Feifei. When Jean Hauser rushed back to the Qin family, the doctor had just left. Qin Feifei was lying on the bed with a pale face. Qin Yongchang stood at the side, his face full of concern. Uncle. Jean Hauser looked at Qin Yongchang and his gaze fell on Qin Feifei's face. Is Feifei okay? She has an old illness. It's not like you don't know. Qin Yongchang glanced at Jean Hauser as he spoke. You haven't come back for the past few days. Feifei misses you too much. She ran out to look for you, but you know the temperature dropped yesterday. Feifei's health isn't good, so when she was drenched in the rain she got sick. Jean Hauser didn't say anything, but Qin Feifei, who was on the bed, glanced at her father. Dad, don't blame Brother Hao. It's not like Brother Hao didn't come to see me on purpose. You know that Brother Hao is busy with work. Feifei, you. Qin Yongchang looked at his daughter with a conflicted expression. He seemed to be helpless that his daughter always valued Jean Hauser more than him. Hauser. Qin Yongchang looked at Zhan Haoze. Originally this wasn't your fault. But Feifei is very weak now, so you should accompany her. As he spoke, Qin Yongchang walked out. The room quieted down, leaving only Zhan Haoze and Qin Feifei. After Qin Yongchang left, Qin Feifei reached out to pull Zhan Haoze's hand. Brother Hao, Dad is too worried about me. It has nothing to do with you. Please don't be angry. I'm not angry. Zhan Haoze wanted to pull his hand out, but Qin Feifei held it tightly. Brother Hao, are you really not angry? Her face was full of uneasiness at this time, as if she was really afraid that Zhan Haoze would be angry. Zhan Haoze pursed his lips into a straight line and shook his head gently. Qin Feifei was satisfied and a gentle smile appeared on her face. But her hands were still holding his hand tightly. Brother Hao, what have you been busy with these days? I miss you very much. When I call you, you always say that you have something to do. When I go to your company, I can't find you. Do you know how worried I am about you? There are a lot of things to do at the company. Zhan Haoze looked at Qin Feifei and resisted the urge to pull his hand back. No matter how busy the company is, you still have to take care of your health. Just look at me and you will understand. Ever since I was young, I have been a patient. Now that I have grown up, not only can I not help you, but I will also tire you out. It's nothing. Zhan Haoze's voice was very indifferent. His indifference didn't just start today. Ever since Qin Feifei saved Zhan Haoze and brought him home, he had always been like this. However, the more Zhan Haoze was like this, the more Qin Feifei couldn't stop herself. She always wanted to get Zhan Haoze. Brother Hao, you don't have to comfort me. I know that you have always thought of me as a burden, so you don't want to tell me anything about the company or the outside world. But Brother Hao, I really like you. Qin Feifei's eyes were fixed on Zhan Haoze. She could clearly see that those eyes were all about him. I know. Qin Feifei bit her lip. She was still a little hurt by Zhan Haoze's reaction. Brother Hao, what about you? Do you like me? Zhan Haoze frowned and looked at Qin Feifei as he withdrew his hand. You're not in good health. Rest early. Brother Hao. Qin Feifei went to pull his hand again. She looked up at him with pleading eyes. Do you hate me? Don't think too much. It's nothing. Then why didn't you come back to accompany me? You said that you would take care of me. Feifei. This time, Zhan Haoze didn't have a cold expression. In my heart, you're similar to my sister. But, all right, it's getting late. You should rest. Zhan Haoze patted her shoulder and turned to leave. After he left, Qin Feifei's expression almost changed. Who wanted to be his sister? Who wanted to be his sister? She had always wanted to be his woman, not his sister. Qin Feifei looked at the bedside lamp at the head of the bed and swept the floor without hesitation. The room was very soundproof and covered with a thick carpet. No matter how loud the noise she made, no one would hear it. Not only did she smash the bedside lamp, but Qin Feifei also threw everything around her that could be smashed and thrown away. It wasn't until she was panting and exhausted that she called the servants to clean up the room. The servants of the Qin family were already used to Qin Feifei's outburst from time to time. They silently packed up the things and put in new ones. In a short period of time, even the carpet had been changed. The room was the same as before Zhan Haoze came in. There was no trace of damage. Zhan Haoze went downstairs and met Qin Yongchang. When he saw him, he waved. The two of them once again went to the Qin family's study room one after the other. Haoze, have you been busy recently? I'm fine. Zhan Haoze's voice was indifferent and sounded very calm. You haven't been in the company for a few days, and the company's matters have been pushed back a lot. Look, I'm old now and my energy can't keep up. In the future, you still have to spend more time on business. Yes, I understand. Speaking of which, I'm almost at the age to retire. Look, how about you take over the Qin Corporation? Zhan Haoze lowered his eyes and his face was expressionless. I'm afraid that's not appropriate, right? There's nothing inappropriate about it. After you and Feifei get married, won't the Qin family be yours? Zhan Haoze didn't reply, but Qin Yongchang sighed at this moment. Haoze, I also know that you're not willing to marry Feifei. But Feifei is my only daughter. She really likes you. I can't let her suffer. Uncle. I also know that all these years, you've only treated Feifei as your sister. There's no love between a man and a woman. But her health isn't good and she's been spoiled by me. I won't be at ease handing her over to someone else. After thinking about it, only you are suitable. Seeing that Zhan Haoze didn't say anything, the expression on Qin Yongchang's face became more and more pained. Haoze, you can't forget your roots. If our family hadn't taken you in, sent you to school and given you the best conditions, how could you have achieved what you have today? Don't tell me you're thinking of abandoning Feifei just because you're successful? Uncle, I've said it before. I treat Feifei as my sister. I'll do my best to take care of her. What's more useful than marrying her and accompanying her for the rest of her life? Seeing that Jean Hauser still wanted to speak, he went forward and patted him on the shoulder. All right, you should be tired today. Go and rest. As for the wedding date, I'll get someone to pick a good day. Anyway, you guys already understand and are familiar with each other. If you need time, then get engaged first, then get married. Uncle? All right, I still have work to deal with. You can go back to your room and rest first. Qin Yongchang didn't listen to Jean Hauser. He waved his hand and sent him away. Jean Hauser glanced at Qin Yongchang, then finally took a step back and left the study. Before he returned to his room, he saw the family servants coming down from upstairs with 2 large garbage bags. Jean Hauser stood there until the servant left. Then he went upstairs again. Shi Mingwan was shocked when she received Xiao Qi's call. Hello. Hello, Mingwan. Xiao Qi's voice sounded very happy. Have you recovered from your cold? Yes. Thank you for your concern. It wasn't a cold, but Shi Mingwan couldn't say that. What's the matter? That's good. I said I wanted to come and see you. No need. Shi Mingwan answered a little quickly. She looked at the time. Jean Hauser hadn't returned yet, but she had already prepared the food. That's a pity. Xiao Qi thought for a moment. Mingwan, we didn't finish watching the movie that day. Do you have time recently? I might not have time recently. Shi Mingwan bit her lip. My studio has received a new order recently, so I'm a little busy. I see. Xiao Qi nodded. Then can we have a meal together? Xiao Qi, look, you're very busy and don't have time to watch a movie. Then you have to have time to eat, right? Before I came, Auntie told me that you don't know how to take care of yourself. Look, you can't let me disappoint Auntie, can you? Shi Mingwan bit her lip. After thinking about it, she decided to agree. At least she should make things clear to him. Then how about this? Let's meet at noon tomorrow. Okay. Xiao Qi was satisfied. He said a few more words of concern to her and told her to take good care of herself before hanging up. Shi Mingwan sat down and took out her phone to call Jean Hauser. However, no one picked up after calling for a long time. She looked at the table of dishes, and her good mood seemed to have suddenly disappeared. She had been very happy these past few days. Jean Hauser had been here with her. During the day she stayed at home to draw while Jean Hauser went to work. At night they ate together, took a walk and lingered. Jean Hauser was much gentler than before. At least he no longer tormented her for fun. She could also get happiness from that matter. When her body merged with Jean Hauser's body, she felt satisfied. Not only her body but also her heart. That was the dear brother she had been longing to find. That was the person she had always liked and loved. Looking at the black screen, Shi Mingwan sent another message to Jean Hauser. She didn't say anything unnecessary. She just asked him if he would come back for dinner. This time Jean Hauser replied, I have something to do today. You eat first. Putting down her phone, Shi Mingwan looked at the dishes on the table and felt a headache. There was also a trace of undetectable disappointment and loneliness. The next day Shi Mingwan arrived at the place she had agreed to meet Xiao Qi early. She had always been afraid of the cold. Today she was wearing a thick khaki coat and a scarf of the same color. Her entire body looked much more plump. She thought that she had arrived early, but she didn't expect Xiao Qi to be earlier than her. Sorry I'm late. Not at all. I arrived early. Xiao Qi got up and pulled a chair for Shi Mingwan. This action made Shi Mingwan a little uncomfortable. She took a step back and looked at Xiao Qi. I'll do it myself. Can't you give me a chance to serve a beauty? This person. Shi Mingwan really didn't know what to say. She didn't decline anymore and sat down. The temperature of the air conditioner in the room was very high. She took off her coat and put it aside. Are all fashion designers as good at dressing as you? Xiao Qi looked at the clothes she was wearing, and there was obvious admiration in his eyes. Shi Mingwan looked at herself and cleared her throat. Thank you. I think so. But I think you're definitely the best at dressing, Xiao Qi whispered. After all, they can't be as beautiful as you. Thank you. Shi Mingwan felt a little uncomfortable from his praise. The waiter happened to bring the menu over at this moment, and Xiao Qi very gracefully let Shi Mingwan order first. After ordering the dishes, Shi Mingwan looked at Xiao Qi and thought about how to speak to him. At this moment, Xiao Qi poured her a cup of hot tea. It's cold outside. Have a cup of tea first. Thank you. To be honest, Xiao Qi was really a very good marriage partner. No matter what, he was very suitable. But this was how the world was. You might not like the suitable one. Xiaoqi. Last time I was going to introduce my situation but I didn't finish. I think I'd better tell you about it. Her serious attitude made Xiaoqi also become a little serious. Go ahead. I want to say that we're actually not suitable. What? What's wrong with me? Xiaoqi asked instinctively. After asking, he realized that he seemed to be too narcissistic. I'm sorry, I think my qualifications are not bad, so I think you can give it a try. Shi Mingwan shook her head. The problem isn't with you, it's with me. She picked up the cup with both hands and held it in her hand. She felt the slight heat wake her up. I have someone I like. This time Xiaoqi was stunned. You have someone you like? Yes. Then why did you come on a blind date? He saw that Shi Mingwan didn't look like one of those two-timing women. Because my parents don't know, and even if they did, they might object. I see. She didn't say more, but Xiaoqi seemed to understand. Is it because the person you like can't agree to your family's conditions, so your parents object? Shi Mingwan knew that it wasn't because of that, but since Xiaoqi was certain, she didn't want to explain any more. Her silence was tacit agreement. Xiaoqi nodded. I understand. The person you like doesn't want to marry into the family, and your parents object? Thinking about it, most men, especially now that many of them were only children, how could they agree to marry into the family? Mingwan, we already know each other. I think, if possible, you should go and do the ideological work for your parents. That would be better. I thank you, but there's no need. Some things aren't as simple as you think. Shi Mingwan hadn't told her family about this at all, nor did she tell Zhang Haoze. She wasn't sure if Zhang Haoze would agree or not. She wasn't willing to continue, so Xiaoqi didn't ask. The waiter began to serve the dishes, and the two of them ate in silence. When Xiaoqi put down the bowl and chopsticks, he looked at Shi Mingwan. You like that person a lot? I love him. Shi Mingwan also put down her chopsticks. When she answered these 3 words, her eyes lit up, and her entire face was filled with the light of love. What else did Xiaoqi not understand? Okay, I got it. I won't disturb you again next time. Sorry, it's okay. Xiaoqi was able to let it go. But Mingwan, as your friend, I still want to give you a suggestion. Since you like that man so much, then can that man also sacrifice himself for you? I don't think it's a big deal to marry into the family. Even if the child takes your surname, he will still be his child in the future. This is the truth. Times are different, so there are some things that don't need to be rigidly formal. What do you think? Thank you, I understand. I'm sorry I was being too talkative. Anyway, I feel that if that man really loves you, he will definitely agree to this condition. Shi Mingwan was silent. After Xiaoqi left, she was still sitting in her seat. If a man really loved her, would he agree to her conditions? But when that person was Zhang Haoze, why didn't she have any confidence at all? That night, Zhang Haoze didn't come again. She called him and he said that he had something to do. Shi Mingwan hung up the phone and thought about how to bring up this matter the next time she saw Zhang Haoze. It wasn't until the 3rd day that Shi Mingwan finally saw Zhang Haoze when she returned home. He didn't look any different, but Shi Mingwan could tell from his furrowed brows that he seemed to be a little depressed. Zhang Haoze. Chapter 672. Zhang Haoze shook his head and reached out to pull her into his arms. Shi Mingwan was hugged by him and she didn't move for a moment. She wanted to look up at him, but the back of her head was held down by him. The faint smell of mint on his body entered her nose. Shi Mingwan noticed that Zhang Haoze seemed to be different from before. After a while, he finally let go of her hand. His big hand caressed her cheek and she just looked at him. Have you eaten? No. Shi Mingwan looked in the direction of the kitchen. I'm about to cook. Go. Shi Mingwan glanced at him. She wasn't in a hurry to go to the kitchen. Instead, she looked at him. Are you really okay? Zhang Haoze shook his head. Shi Mingwan bit her lip. She knew that Zhang Haoze was always like this. When he was still her dear brother, he didn't like to tell her anything. I'll go cook. While eating, Shi Mingwan kept looking at Zhang Haoze. She paused when she met his gaze. Zhang Haoze. Yes. I don't know much about business. But if you have anything to say, you can tell me. I might not be able to help, but I can listen to you. Zhang Haoze was stunned for a moment. He looked at Shi Mingwan and nodded slightly. Okay. He said okay, but he might not really agree. Shi Mingwan knew. She didn't ask any more. Just when she thought Zhang Haoze wouldn't speak, Zhang Haoze spoke. I have to go out tomorrow. Shi Mingwan didn't expect him to take the initiative to tell her about his whereabouts. Her hand holding the chopstick stopped there and she stared at him blankly. I might be gone for more than half a month. That long? Shi Mingwan bit her lip. Her words were unconsciously tainted with disappointment. Zhang Haoze didn't say anything and just continued eating. Shi Mingwan knew his personality. He couldn't say anything nice, but she still hoped to see Zhang Haoze's reluctance to part with her. However, he appeared so calm. Shi Mingwan didn't wait for Zhang Haoze to say that he was reluctant to part with her. However, at night, it was as if he had returned to the beginning of their relationship. He took with all his might and plundered with all his might. In the end, Shi Mingwan felt that her waist was about to break, but Zhang Haoze didn't stop until she was exhausted and fell into a deep sleep. When Shi Mingwan woke up in the morning, Zhang Haoze was already gone. Looking at the empty house, she could not help but feel a sense of loss in her heart. He picked up his phone to check the time. When he opened the web page, he saw 2 words. Wait for me. There were no more words, only these 2 words. Shi Mingwan's disappointment suddenly disappeared. Of course she would wait for him. She had waited for so long. He didn't mind waiting for another half a month. No one knew where he was going or what he was going to do. Half a month? Come to think of it, that was really a long time. Shi Mingwan's dilemma didn't last long. She received a call from Su Qingsang. Su Qingsang and Hua Jinyao had decided to return to Rong City together. Not only did they want to go back, but they also wanted to bring Xiang Kaiping back with them. The melancholy of parting made Shi Mingwan recover from the disappointment she felt just now. Shi Mingwan and Su Qingsang were high school classmates and deskmates. Ever since the 2 of them met, they had gotten along very well in the past few years because they were very compatible. Even though the 2 of them later chose completely different majors, their relationship had always been very good. The medical university was also very close to Herzi University. Although going to Rong City was still in the country, it couldn't be compared to Lin City. On the 13th of the year, Su Qingsang and Hua Jinyao were at the airport, preparing to fly to Rong City. Shi Mingwan was reluctant to leave. She went to the airport early and talked to Su Qingsang for a long time. Su Qingsang was also reluctant to leave her, and she didn't look very happy. She seemed to have something on her mind. Shi Mingwan didn't think too much about it, thinking that she was reluctant to leave Lin City. In fact, she was also reluctant to leave. She didn't sleep well last night, and there were dark circles under her eyes. When Su Qingsang noticed it, she could only remind her again not to focus on drawing next time and ignore her health. Shi Mingwan knew that she really cared about her and was touched. After sending Su Qingsang away, Shi Mingwan thought for a while and put her energy back into work. Since she planned to participate in the competition in France, she had to put some effort into it. On the day of the Lantern Festival, Shi Mingwan thought of Zhang Haoze again. She still remembered that year when the 2 of them ate lantern dumplings together, and she also remembered that he bought the wine-fermented meatballs as lantern dumplings. Not wanting her emotions to be trapped in her thoughts of Zhang Haoze, Shi Mingwan went home. Mother Shi made the lantern dumplings and waited for her. When she ate the lantern dumplings, she took a photo and posted it on her WeChat moments. Then she sent the photo to Zhang Haoze alone. The lantern dumplings are very sweet. I miss you very much. She never received a reply from Zhang Haoze. At first, Shi Mingwan kept looking at her phone, but later she simply put it down. She focused on accompanying her parents and sister. At the same time in Qing City, Zhang Haoze was sitting in the car, and beside him was his assistant, Tang Hua. President Zhang. Tang Hua placed a document in Zhang Haoze's hand. I've already checked. The old man isn't feeling well and has already been hospitalized. He was sent in yesterday. It's the festival today. The old man dislikes those people for being noisy and chased them away. Zhang Haoze casually flipped through the information in front of him under the lights in the car. Are you sure there's no one? There are bodyguards guarding the door and doctors on duty. Let's go. Zhang Haoze placed the document back in Tang Hua's hand. Let's go meet the old man. Boss. Tang Hua even called him by his old name. Isn't it too early? I heard from the doctor that he has already passed the critical stage. It seems that the old man can still live for a long time. We don't have to be in a hurry. No. Zhang Haoze stared at the entrance of the hospital with a sinister gaze. I don't want to wait anymore. In the VIP ward of the hospital, the entire floor was very quiet. The weather in Qing City had been pretty good these few days. The full moon hung high in the sky outside. In the ward, an old man who looked to be in his 70s was sleeping on the hospital bed with his eyes tightly closed. The sudden sound in the room made him open his eyes. The environment he had been in for decades made him instantly alert. His hand reached under the pillow. If I were you, I wouldn't act rashly now. The man deliberately lowered his voice, but it sounded very clear. The old man's hand paused. The lights in the ward were turned on at this moment, and he narrowed his eyes. After adapting to the light, he looked at John Hauser in front of him. "It's you?" "It seems that the old man knows me. Then I don't need to introduce myself." John Hauser walked to the sofa opposite the bed and sat down. He folded his legs elegantly, and he looked relaxed and leisurely. The old man stared at him for a long time and nodded gently. "I didn't expect you to come back after so many years." "Yes. I've disappointed you that I didn't die outside." John Hauser met the old man's sharp gaze and didn't dodge at all. The corners of his lips curled up with a hint of mockery. The old man coughed a few times and his face was redder than before. "You came back to take revenge?" The old man narrowed his eyes. His old and shrewd eyes didn't miss any of John Hauser's expressions. The corners of John Hauser's lips curled up slightly. He leaned back against the back of the sofa. "Shouldn't I?" The old man was silent and stared at John Hauser. "What do you want to do?" "You should ask me what I did." The old man glared at John Hauser, and a hint of wariness suddenly appeared in his eyes. "What did you do?" John Hauser didn't answer the old man's question. He got up and walked to the end of the bed. He pulled out the medical record and glanced at it. "I think it's better for you not to know now." Putting the medical record back, John Hauser's expression was indifferent. "Otherwise, I'm afraid that if you know, your condition will worsen and you die of anger. That would be my sin. Don't you think so?" "Grandpa, you—" The old man covered his chest because of his words. His other hand pointed at John Hauser, and his face was livid. John Hauser looked at him without any fluctuation. He looked at this old man who could be considered to be in his twilight years, Jean Cohen. Jean Cohen had difficulty breathing. He reached out his hand to get the medicine. The moment he got the medicine bottle, Jean Hauser gently pinched the bottle in his hand. He flipped the bottle over and raised it a little higher. "Grandpa, why are you angry? You are the pillar of the Jean family now. If you were to fall, the Jean family would be in a mess." Jean Cohen's expression became even uglier. He looked at John Hauser as if he was looking at an Azura from hell. He raised his hand, but he didn't manage to grab the medicine. He could only reach out and want to ring the bell for help. John Hauser looked at his movements and saw that his trembling fingers were about to touch the bell. However, he grabbed Jean Cohen's hand the moment he was about to touch it. Jean Cohen panted even more violently. Jean Hauser expressionlessly pressed his body back onto the bed. Before he could react, he poured out a pill from the bottle and put it into his mouth. After feeding him the medicine, he seemed to have been stained with something dirty. He took out a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his hands clean. After taking the medicine, Jean Cohen's breathing finally stopped. However, his expression couldn't recover for a while. Seeing Jean Hauser's actions, his face turned from white to red again. His swollen face, which had almost turned purple, looked a little terrifying under the light. You, Jean Cohen pointed at Jean Hauser and spent a lot of effort to finish his sentence. What exactly do you want to do?" Jean Hauser looked at the expression on Jean Cohen's face and suddenly smiled. He rarely smiled, and his smile at this moment undoubtedly carried deep malice. He threw the handkerchief to the side, bent down and looked at Jean Cohen. He looked at his old and turbid eyes and said word by word extremely slowly, "I'm here to get back what I deserve." Jean Cohen glared at him and his hands trembled even more. Jean Hauser didn't want to let it go just like that. He moved forward a little and his voice was even softer than before. "After you get it, destroy it." Jean Cohen was completely out of breath this time. His eyes widened and his breath was stuck there, almost suffocating. The corners of Jean Hauser's lips curled into a mocking smile. Before the other party completely fainted, he pressed the bell. He stood up straight and looked at Jean Cohen's powerless hand. He left the ward without looking back. When he left, he bumped into the doctors who had rushed over. The doctors were very concerned about the people in this special ward. When they saw Jean Hauser suddenly appear, they didn't understand where this person came from. Jean Hauser acted as if he didn't see them and walked straight out. The bodyguard who had been staying inside just now had already come back to his senses. He reached out to stop Jean Hauser. Jean Hauser glanced at the two people coldly. The aura of the two bodyguards was actually taken away by him, and they took a step back at the same time. After coming out of the hospital, Tang Hua was already waiting outside. When he saw Jean Hauser come out, he was the first to open the car door for him. When Jean Hauser got into the car, he also got into the car. "Boss? Don't worry, I won't die." Jean Hauser looked at the inpatient building outside the car window. His eyes were a little cold. He reached out and took out the document from just now to look at it. Old fox. Boss? Tang Hua looked at him. Are we going back to the hotel next? Jean Hauser was about to nod when his phone rang. He opened it and saw a message. On it was a bowl of glutinous rice balls. Looking at the photo and the words, the corners of Jean Hauser's lips unconsciously curled up a little. His fingers swiped across the screen and was about to reply. Bang. Their car was hit by someone from behind. Jean Hauser's phone flew out and fell into the car. He turned around abruptly and Tang Hua turned around with him. The two of them saw that under the night sky, 3 cars were following behind them. They had already surrounded their car. Boss. Tang Hua looked at Jean Hauser worriedly. Jean Hauser narrowed his eyes. Speed up. The driver heard his words and stepped on the accelerator. They accelerated and the car behind them also accelerated. At this moment, the car on the right was once again heading in their direction and slamming hard into them. With a bang, the car that Jean Hauser and the others were sitting in was knocked to the side, and then it slammed heavily into the side guardrail. The car collided extremely violently, but the 3 cars behind it didn't intend to let it go just like that. The car behind them followed suit and crashed into them. There was another ping sound. This time it was even louder than the previous 2 times. Shi Mingwan waited until midnight, but she didn't receive a reply from Jean Hauser. Her mood dropped again. She ate lantern dumplings with her parents, admired the moon and chatted with her sister. When she returned to her room she couldn't fall asleep. She tossed and turned on the bed, feeling conflicted. She couldn't help but take out her phone to take a look. There was still no reply from Jean Hauser. She bit her lip and couldn't help but feel a little lonely. She didn't know who said that it wasn't because she was lonely that she missed him, but because she missed him that she was lonely. In the past she thought that these words were pretentious, but now she realized that it was true. It wasn't pretentious. She couldn't help but want to call Jean Hauser, but she was worried that Jean Hauser really had something to do. After thinking about it, she could only continue sending messages. Good night. After sending these 2 words, Shi Mingwan waited for a while, but before she could receive a reply from Jean Hauser, she fell asleep in a depressed and conflicted mood. Dear brother. Shi Mingwan looked at Qiao Zhe with an obvious smile in her eyes. Are you serious? Today the young man came home and told her that he had helped her solve the problem of going to school so she could continue going to school. This news made her exceptionally happy. Yes. The young man nodded. Looking at the news he brought, Shi Mingwan's eyes lit up. She felt that this decision was right. That's really great. Shi Mingwan couldn't help but reach out and hug Qiao Zhe. Dear brother, how did you do it? Qiao Zhe was caught off guard by her and felt a little uncomfortable. His hand hung there and didn't move for a long time. After Shi Mingwan finished hugging him, she realized that she was a little too excited. She took a step back and looked at the young man, feeling a little embarrassed. Dear brother, when can I go to school? You can go tomorrow. Qiao Zhe looked at Shi Mingwan. It's the nearby 5th high school. They have already agreed to accept you. You can go and register tomorrow. Then you can go to school. Really? Shi Mingwan was very happy. That's really great. After being happy, she looked at the young man with concern. Then dear brother, what about you? Me? What about me? I'm going to school. What about you? I won't go. It's the same for you. Dear brother? Shi Mingwan looked at the young man. Even if she didn't understand the key point, she could understand that with Qiao Zhe's current ability, he must have done something for her to be able to go to school without a Lin City Huku. She didn't understand what he had done. To her, everything about the young man was like a mystery. He could always solve all the problems in the shortest time. Dear brother, if you don't go to school then I won't go either. What nonsense are you talking about? The young man glared at her. Didn't you want to be a designer? What? You don't want to anymore? Shi Mingwan bit her lip and looked at the young man. She kept shaking her head. No, I want to be, but I want to go to school with you. All right, you don't have to worry about my matters. The young man looked at her with a strong expression that couldn't be refused. Don't worry about me for now. I've asked the teacher. She said that you haven't been to school for the past 6 months and might not be able to keep up. Before school starts, you have to buy a semester's worth of books to read first. Dear brother, let's go. I'll take you to buy books. Shi Mingwan couldn't win against Qiao Zhe, so she could only compromise. She didn't quite understand why the young man didn't go to school himself. She vaguely knew why, but at that time she was still young, so she couldn't understand the answer. Shi Mingwan waited for a few days, but Jean Hauser didn't appear. Another half a month passed and it was already the first month of the lunar calendar. In the middle of the second month of the lunar calendar, the temperature in Lin City began to rise. At first, Shi Mingwan would try to call Zhan Haoze, but after she realized that she couldn't get through to his phone, she stopped calling him. Every day before she went to bed, she would call Zhan Haoze. If she couldn't get through, she would send another message. If no one replied, she would go back to sleep. At the same time as the weather warmed up, Shi Mingwan's work also passed the preliminary round of the French fashion design competition. The other party sent an invitation letter and asked Shi Mingwan to prepare to go to France to participate in the rest of the competition. This good news more or less made Shi Mingwan feel a little better. But it only lasted for less than half a day. Chapter 673. Shi Mingwan was wearing the new clothes Qiaoze had bought for her and carrying the new school bag Qiaoze had bought for her. The book inside was also bought by Qiaoze. The school bag was very heavy not only for this semester but also for the previous semester. Fortunately, Shi Mingwan's grades had always been good. Although she didn't study last semester, she believed that she would work hard to catch up. She was thinking about why the teacher called her today and didn't give her any homework. Instead, he asked her to read through the books that she had read before. If there was anything she didn't understand, she could look for her teacher. She was in a good mood and quickened her pace. After living in this bungalow for more than half a year, she was no longer as careless as when she first came here. Turn right, turn left. Just 3 more alleys and they would reach home. But before he got there, he heard the sounds of fighting. This area was really chaotic. Shi Mingwan couldn't help but quicken her steps. She wanted to avoid it, but she heard a familiar voice. What? Haven't you learned your lesson from last time? The youth's voice had already passed the stage of puberty. His voice had already begun to become clear and bright, and it was the voice she heard every day. She widened her eyes and couldn't help but stop in her tracks. She quietly walked over and hid behind the corner of the wall. She silently poked her head out. Beside the young man stood a few boys that she did not recognize. They were all about the same age as him. There were a few people lying on the ground. The leader's face was covered in blood, and the young man's foot was stepping on the man's chest. What if you haven't learned it? I'll say it again. This place as well as the East Pier are all my territory. The next time you cross the border, I won't be polite anymore. The young man was already more than 1.8 meters tall and he was thin. Most of the time, although he was quiet in front of her, he was gentle. Shi Mingwan had never seen this youth before. Her heart was beating a little fast. The person he was stepping on wanted to get up. Stinking brat, I'm telling you, don't be arrogant. Brother Liang won't let you off. Heh. The youth laughed. It was a very arrogant laugh. He began to exert force on his leg. Brother Liang won't let me off, right? Then let him try. Not to mention Brother Liang, even if he had the ability to call Big Boss Hui over, I wouldn't be afraid of him. Understand? As he spoke, his foot was pressed against the man's chin. That person's neck was stepped on, and his face was filled with pain. His face, which had already been beaten into a pig's head, looked even scarier now. You, the man started to lose his breath, but the young man had no intention of letting go. Not only did he not, but he also stepped even harder. The man's eyeballs were about to pop out of their sockets and he was about to stop breathing. Shi Mingwan was shocked and couldn't help but gasp. That voice was very soft, but it moved Qiaoze. The young man's gaze shifted over. Shi Mingwan quickly retracted her body, but she was still a step too late and was seen by the youth. The young man's expression was rather ugly. He retracted his leg, caught his breath, and coughed violently. He turned to look at the few people following him and gave them a look. Those people began to deal with the aftermath. The people lying on the ground were quickly dragged away by them. The young man's expression was solemn as he clenched his fists at his sides. He was only stunned for a few seconds before he reacted. His slender legs walked step by step in Shi Mingwan's direction. Shi Mingwan's body was trembling. In the past half a year that she had been with the young man, other than occasionally coming back with some injuries, the young man had rarely been injured in the past few days. She knew that he would fight outside, but she had never seen the young man treat others like this. It turned out that the young man wasn't uninjured. Instead, had he changed from a victim to a perpetrator? Shi Mingwan didn't dare to think about it. Her body was trembling. She didn't know what she was afraid of. However, the ruthlessness on the young man's face just now really scared her. A pair of long legs suddenly appeared in front of her eyes. She looked up along the legs and saw the young man's expressionless face. Her body actually went limp and she sat on the ground just like that. The young man wasn't in a hurry to reach out to help her up. He was already 16 years old. He was tall and thin, and one could already see the shadow of an adult on his body. He stared at her face from above, his lips opening and closing. You saw it. Shi Mingwan instinctively wanted to shake her head, but her body was cold and she couldn't say a word. However, there was a hint of fear in her eyes as she looked at him. The young man looked at her and reached out his hand to her. Shi Mingwan's body trembled. Thinking about the scene just now, she instinctively retreated, wanting to avoid the young man's hand. Qiao Zhe narrowed his eyes, and there was a hint of danger in them. He had asked someone to think of a way to get Shi Mingwan a place to go to school because he didn't want her to stay at home every day, and he didn't want her to see him like this today. However, he didn't expect her to still see it. Looking at Shi Mingwan's avoiding gaze, he forcefully reached out his hand and took away Shi Mingwan's school bag. He carried it on his shoulder. Before she could react to what he was going to do, he bent down and picked her up. Shi Mingwan's body trembled even more, but she was familiar with the young man's embrace. She looked at the young man's handsome side profile and swallowed her saliva. The young man didn't seem to notice that something was wrong with her. He just carried her back to the bungalow where they were. After Shi Mingwan entered the door, her legs were still a little weak. The young man placed her on the sofa. Almost as soon as she was put down by him, she shrunk to the other side of the sofa. The young man suddenly moved his face closer. His big hand supported her side as he stared at her face. Are you afraid of me? Shi Mingwan looked at the young man's familiar face. These days they slept together every night. Sometimes when she was cold, she would wake up to find herself in the young man's arms. The environment of the bungalow was bad, but she had never been cold. She had never been hungry. She suddenly shook her head. Her movements were very gentle but firm. Before the young man could take his hand away, Shi Mingwan bit her lip and said timidly, Did you want to kill him just now? He didn't expect her to ask such a question. The young man was stunned for a moment, then he shook his head. No. Shi Mingwan seemed to be relieved. You don't kill anyone, okay? The young man looked into her eyes and caressed her face with his slender and well-defined hands. Okay. I won't kill anyone. Shi Mingwan heaved a sigh of relief. The young man's hands were a little cold. The weather hadn't turned warm in this season. She looked at him with a hint of anticipation in her eyes. Killing is against the law. She said this in a very low voice. The young man seemed to want to laugh, but he held it in. Yes, killing is against the law. Wanwan really knows a lot. He was treating her like a child. Shi Mingwan gritted her teeth and suddenly raised her voice. Don't care. If you kill someone, you'll go to prison. I won't go to see you when the time comes. She said it resolutely, but the expression in her eyes was completely different. The young man looked at her duplicitous look and raised his eyebrows. Oh, if I go to prison, you won't come to see me? Of course. Shi Mingwan nodded and emphasized, if you go to prison, I'll go home and let you be alone in the future. Her face was young and childish. The young man suddenly reached out and hugged her in his arms. Okay, I'll listen to you. His embrace made Shi Mingwan relax. She wasn't as afraid as before and she was no longer trembling. Dear brother. Don't do anything dangerous, okay? The young man didn't answer her question. He just tightened his arms. Shi Mingwan had a little difficulty breathing, but she still had to say, if you do something dangerous, what will I do? She reached out to push him away and moved away from his arms a little. Dear brother, if you're really locked up or if something else happens, what will I do? After such a long time, she had run away from home. But she had never felt lonely because of him. His care and love for her made her forget the loneliness of being alone. More importantly, she realized that her dear brother was different in her heart. Dear brother, I don't want anything to happen to you, and I don't want to be separated from you, so you have to take care of yourself, okay? The young man looked into her eyes. Her lips opened and closed as she said words that she was worried about him. Today she saw his dark side, but she wasn't afraid, nor did she run away. He couldn't tell what he felt in his heart. Something was surging in his heart. He hugged her tightly again and buried his face in the crook of her neck. His voice was very soft as he smelled the faint fragrance of a young girl on her body. Okay, I promise you. I'll take care of myself and won't be separated from you. Really? Really? Shi Mingwan raised her head and looked into the young man's eyes. Her heart had already calmed down. She bit her lip. Dear brother, we'll always be together, right? Yes. The young man nodded and looked into Shi Mingwan's eyes with a focused expression. We'll always be together. He would be with her, protect her, and not let anyone hurt her. dear brother. Shi Mingwan reached out and hugged the young man's waist. No matter how her dear brother treated others, as long as they could be like this forever, it would be fine. She hugged him very tightly until she saw the trace of blood on the young man's sleeve. She was shocked and forced herself not to look and not to care. She stepped back. She gestured for him to take a shower. She washed his clothes for him, so the blood stain was naturally washed away. However, even though Shi Mingwan could wash away the blood stain, it didn't mean that she could forget the young man's ruthless expression. That night she inevitably had nightmares. She dreamed that the young man was holding a knife in his hand and was constantly slashing at a person whose face couldn't be seen clearly. She screamed with all her might, trying to make the young man stop. When the young man saw her coming, he finally stopped. The young man walked towards her and told her not to be afraid. Shi Mingwan kept shaking her head. Looking at the police who rushed over, she wanted to tell the young man to leave quickly, but she couldn't say anything. She could only watch helplessly as the police took the young man away. No matter how much she cried, it was useless. At this moment, the scene in the dream changed. The young man's face became Zhang Haoze. When she saw Zhang Haoze again, it was through the iron window. Shi Mingwan was frightened. She wanted to pull his hand, but his figure was getting further and further away. She woke up from her dream screaming, "Dear brother, dear brother!" The scene in the dream began to enlarge, and that feeling made her fall into deep despair. She opened her eyes and was shocked by the figure at the head of the bed. When she saw clearly, she realized that the person sitting there was Zhang Haoze. Zhang Haoze? She wasn't fully awake yet, nor had she recovered from the dream. She suddenly saw him and she still felt like she was in a dream. Yes. In the next second, Shi Mingwan suddenly sat up and wrapped her arms around Zhang Haoze's neck. She hugged him tightly. Dear brother, dear brother? When she thought of the figure in the iron window in her dream, she felt a strong sense of insecurity. She hugged him very tightly and pressed her face against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Zhang Haoze let her hug him and didn't move. Shi Mingwan suddenly raised her head and kissed his lips. Her kiss was a little urgent and a little flustered. She was also a little scared. She didn't know what her dear brother had experienced all these years. What made him, a street thug, suddenly become a business elite? She also didn't know how he started the company and what hardships he had experienced. But she thought that he should be safe now, right? It shouldn't be like what she thought in her dream, right? She couldn't help but think of the last time they met. He seemed to be fighting with someone again. That made the feeling of insecurity even more obvious. Dear brother. She kissed his lips haphazardly. All her experience came from him. In this aspect she was undoubtedly clumsy. But this clumsiness made Zhang Haoze lose control. Her hands tugged at his clothes. She was a little anxious. She was so anxious that she couldn't unbuckle her belt even after trying a few times. Her face was red, but at this moment, Zhang Haoze turned the tables and pressed her down on the bed. It was a dark night, and the weather outside was a little gloomy. Spring had arrived and there was a lot of rain. It was accompanied by the occasional sound of spring thunder. Soon it started to rain outside. The sound of the thunderstorm covered up the sound of the collision in the room. Those emotions that were out of control also existed on such a thunderstorm night. When Shi Mingwan woke up in the morning, she thought she had a dream. She dreamed that Zhang Haoze had returned and that he was fine. She dreamed that they were the same as before. She enjoyed the pleasure of being intimate. She opened her eyes, and the feeling of exhaustion and weakness in her body suddenly woke her up. It wasn't a dream. Was Zhang Haoze really back? She sat up abruptly, ignoring the marks on her body and the discomfort on her body. There was no one in the room. She casually put on her clothes and went outside. Zhang Haoze had just closed the door. On the dining table beside him was breakfast that had just been delivered. You're awake? Shi Mingwan blinked her eyes. Only then did she confirm that she was really not dreaming. She went forward and hugged Zhang Haoze again. She rubbed her face against his chest and smelled the mint scent on his body. Her heart slowly relaxed and she finally wasn't so nervous anymore. She looked up at him and realized that he seemed to have lost a little weight. She didn't take a closer look last night, but now that it was daytime, she took a closer look and realized that Zhang Haoze had lost a lot of weight. Not only had he lost weight, but he also looked a little haggard. She had many questions to ask, but in the end she could only hug him again. Thinking of his appearance, she sniffed and her eyes inexplicably felt a little hot. Zhang Haoze let her hug him without moving. After a while he patted her back. Let's eat. Shi Mingwan nodded and walked to the dining table to sit down. Today wasn't the weekend and she still had to go to work. She looked up at Zhang Haoze. You're back from your business trip? Can you rest for the next few days? Yes. Shi Mingwan nodded and looked at him again. Will you come back for dinner tonight? Zhang Haoze looked at her. He still had a lot of things to do. He had to leave again after a few days, but, okay. She wanted to refuse, but the words that came out of her mouth became affirmative. Shi Mingwan smiled and seemed to be relieved. After dinner, Shi Mingwan went to the company. She had spent a few days to draw the work that she was going to compete in. She had named it Blue Mystery. To her, Zhang Haoze was that mystery. But she wasn't in a hurry. She had the patience to slowly solve this mystery. Zhang Haoze got into the car, and Tang Hua looked at him worriedly. Boss, are you okay? Zhang Haoze shook his head. The car accident had caused Zhang Haoze to suffer some minor injuries. However, he refused to rest for long. Instead, after he finished his matters in Qing City, he came here. He roughly knew that the person upstairs was his boss's favorite. But, boss, I'm afraid we'll have a lot of things to do in the future. Moreover, the situation is getting more and more chaotic. It's not appropriate for you to be like this now. Tang Hua had followed Zhang Haoze for a long time. In the past 10 years, what hadn't they experienced? But in the past, those undercurrents were still calm on the surface, but now it was different. Zhang Haoze's appearance in Qing City was equivalent to turning everything over to the surface. Although that car accident didn't cause much damage, it was definitely a warning. Zhang Kun wasn't dead yet, and those people below weren't honest. Not to mention that there were countless people who didn't like Zhang Haoze and wanted to get rid of him. Boss, why don't you stay away from Miss Shi for now? With their current abilities, even if they could protect Shi Mingwan, it wouldn't be good for such a big weakness to be known by others. Zhang Haoze leaned against the back of the chair with his eyes half closed. His face was gloomy and no one knew what he was thinking. He didn't say anything, so Tang Hua couldn't say much. The car drove towards the Qin Corporation's building. Just as they were about to reach the Qin Corporation's building, Zhang Haoze finally spoke. From tomorrow onwards, I'll move back to the Qin family. Boss? You've been living in the Qin family all this time. Do you think those people don't know? The problem now wasn't where he lived, but he didn't finish his sentence, but Zhang Haoze understood what he meant. His face was gloomy, and his expression looked quite solemn. Boss, just listen to me. Tang Hua had told him long ago, but Zhang Haoze had always refused. Was he still hesitating at this time? Stop talking. Boss, what will happen if you get engaged to Miss Qin? It's not like you're getting married. This period of time is just right to divert their attention. It's good for you and sister-in-law sure. Zhang Haoze pursed his lips into a straight line, and his gaze kept looking out of the window. Seeing this, Tang Hua called out again. Chapter 674. There was silence in the car. Zhang Haoze did not respond to Tang Hua's words. He knew that Tang Hua was right. At this stage, it was best and most suitable for him to get engaged to Qin Feifei. Putting aside the fact that it could divert the attention of that group of people, the Qin family had some influence in Xi province. Qin Feifei's maternal family also had a certain background. Although Qin Yongchang was a despicable person, he truly loved his daughter. Qin Feifei wasn't Shi Mingwan. Moreover, it was just an engagement. It wouldn't affect anything. If he was rational, he would have agreed. Lowering his eyes, he rubbed his temples. Let's not talk about this anymore. Let's solve the problem in front of us first. Boss. Tang Hua felt that it was a pity. This was a really good opportunity. All right. Zhang Haoze was not only thinking about the matter in front of him, but also other things. Tell old 6 and old 7 to hurry up. He was really impatient from waiting. Understood. Tang Hua looked at Zhang Haoze's expression and felt a little uncomfortable. Boss, don't worry. It's all temporary. When our troubles are resolved, you can be with sister-in-law. It was just that the troubles in front of them were not easy to solve. He knew, and so did Zhang Haoze. The carriage fell into silence. After a long time, Zhang Haoze turned his face and looked out of the window. They had already arrived at the Qin Corporation building. Thinking of Qin Yongchang, that old fox, his face darkened. During this period of time, Qin Yongchang's movements are also very big. Be on guard. I know. Tang Hua thought of Qin Yongchang and there was a hint of disdain on his lips. However, when the car stopped, all traces of those emotions disappeared. Zhang Haoze hadn't been in Lin City for a while, so there was a pile of work that he hadn't finished dealing with. For the whole morning he was basically dealing with all kinds of official matters. Apart from the Qin Corporation's business, he was also responsible for several companies under his name. When it was almost lunchtime, Qin Feifei arrived. Brother Hao. Qin Feifei looked at Zhang Haoze and felt very wronged. Where have you been all this time? Why aren't you back yet? I went on a business trip. Zhang Haoze's voice was very soft. Qin Feifei found that it was very rare for Zhang Haoze to not smile at her for a long time, but his attitude today could be considered gentle. She was happy in her heart, and the pout on her face lessened a little. Brother Hao, do you know how much I miss you? You're always busy when I call you, and you don't reply to my messages. I almost thought something happened to you. Didn't I tell you? I'm on a business trip. Zhang Haoze looked at her. What's the matter? Can't I look for you if I have nothing to do? Qin Feifei stood in front of him. Brother Hao, you haven't eaten with me for a long time. No matter what, you have to eat with me today. I still have work here. Work, all you know is work. Qin Feifei pouted her lips. Work will never be finished. I want you to accompany me. She looked at the time and stepped forward to hold Zhang Haoze's hand. Let's go. It's almost time for dinner. You still have time to eat, right? Feifei, let's go. Qin Feifei pulled Zhang Haoze up. Zhang Haoze originally wanted to pull her hand away, but he didn't know what he thought of, but he let her pull him up and go outside. When he passed by the assistant's office, he happened to see Tang Hua. When Tang Hua saw his actions, he obviously heaved a sigh of relief. President Zhang. Yes. Zhang Haoze nodded. I'm going out to eat with Feifei. You keep an eye on the company. Yes. Tang Hua nodded and gave Zhang Haoze a look. President Zhang, be careful on the road. I'm afraid there will be a traffic jam at this time. I know. Qin Feifei looked at Tang Hua and then at Zhang Haoze. There will be a traffic jam at this time? It can't be, right? Let's go. Zhang Haoze brought Tang Hua downstairs. They went downstairs and got into the car. As expected, they saw a few tails behind them. Zhang Haoze narrowed his eyes. He didn't move. When Qin Feifei's face approached his arm, he didn't push her away. When they arrived at the restaurant, it was Qin Feifei's favorite restaurant. After entering the door, Zhang Haoze looked behind him from the corner of his eye. The car that was following them had already stopped on the opposite side of the road. There was a trace of mockery in Zhang Haoze's eyes. Brother Hao, what do you want to eat? Anything is fine. Zhang Haoze turned to look at Qin Feifei. It was rare that he didn't give her a cold face like before. Shi Mingwan went to the studio today. After a while, she would go to France to participate in the fashion design competition. Before that, she had to arrange the content of the studio. However, today she was obviously a little absent-minded. She was thinking about what to eat tonight. She hadn't seen Zhang Haoze for so long. Should she make it more grand today? With this thought in mind, Shi Mingwan couldn't help but turn on her phone. Here, she downloaded an app that specialized in teaching people how to cook. Looking at the menu inside, Shi Mingwan left the company early to buy ingredients. When she got home, she started preparing dinner. She sent a message to Zhang Haoze, asking him to remember to come back for dinner. When Zhang Haoze received his message, he had just driven out of the Qin Corporation's building. In the Qin Corporation's building, Zhang Haoze had already gotten into the car. He was about to head in the direction of Shi Mingwan's house when he saw the people who had helped him shake off at noon following him again. Zhang Haoze's face darkened. Thinking about his apartment near the company, he turned the car around and drove in the direction of the apartment. During the rush hour, the traffic was very heavy. It wasn't easy for him to shake off those 3 cars. The car drove to the apartment. Because this was a high-end residential area, cars outside couldn't enter, so Zhang Haoze didn't have to worry about those people following him. After entering the underground parking lot, he went upstairs and changed his clothes. He disguised himself before going downstairs again. He changed his car and left from another exit. As expected, there were people guarding the other exit. He drove the car on the road, but the car behind him didn't move. When Zhang Haoze arrived at Shi Mingwan's apartment, she had already waited for him for nearly 2 hours. Seeing Zhang Haoze enter the door, Shi Mingwan's worry was half relieved, but she couldn't help but ask. You've been at work until now? Yes. Zhang Haoze replied, but Shi Mingwan suddenly realized that something was wrong. Other than in bed, every time she saw Zhang Haoze, he was wearing a suit and shirt. Today he was wearing a casual jacket. You didn't wear this to work this morning? Yes. Zhang Haoze nodded. I accidentally poured coffee on my clothes at the company, so I changed. In fact, he had put on a beard and a hat just now, but he had removed those disguises before coming up. Shi Mingwan felt that it was a little strange, but she couldn't tell what was strange. After thinking about it, she pulled Zhang Haoze's hand. Wait a moment. Dinner will be ready soon. Shi Mingwan gestured for him to wait for a while as she spoke, then she went to the kitchen. Her footsteps were a little fast. Jean Hauser didn't quite understand why she was in such a hurry until he saw the dining table. There was a candlestick on the white modern dining table. Beside the candlestick was a bouquet of white roses in an exquisite vase. It looked very festive. The tablecloths and cutlery had been laid out on both sides. From everything, it could be seen that Shi Mingwan had carefully arranged today's dinner. He still remembered the clothes she was wearing. A red, close-fitting dress. Jean Hauser couldn't help but get up and walk towards the kitchen. Shi Mingwan had just taken out the ingredients to process. When she saw him come in, her face was a little red. You go out. I'll be ready soon. With him here, she would be too embarrassed to show off. Jean Hauser stood at the door and didn't move. He just stared at his face. Shi Mingwan felt more and more uncomfortable under his gaze. She reached out to push him. Go out. Hurry up, go out. Jean Hauser pulled her hand over, lowered his head, and kissed her lips hard. He didn't go deeper and stopped after a brief kiss. I'll wait for you. He finally left the kitchen. Shi Mingwan's face was a little red and a little hot. She patted her face to let her breathing and heartbeat return to normal. She turned around, looked at the ingredients on the cooking table and began to work. She had tried frying steak before, but the taste was really only average. She only hoped that Jean Hauser wouldn't mind. Half an hour later, Shi Mingwan brought out the fried steak, the pasta she had made, and a salad. It's ready to eat. She set everything up and looked at Jean Hauser, but he suddenly grabbed her hand. I think you've also prepared wine? What? Shi Mingwan's pretty face turned red. She had really prepared it. But when he said it directly, it gave her a feeling that he couldn't wait. She turned around shyly and took out the bottle of red wine from the wine cabinet. It's not a particularly expensive wine. She didn't know much about wine, so she just picked a relatively expensive bottle to buy. It's okay. Jean Hauser stood up and watched her prepare all of this. He resisted the urge to go forward and hug her. Instead, he opened the wine and poured it for her and himself. Shi Mingwan sat down opposite him. The dining table wasn't big. She picked up her glass and clinked glasses with him. Jean Hauser took the glass from her hand and stared at her face with a burning gaze. What's wrong? Shi Mingwan felt uncomfortable under his gaze. Is there something on my face? No. Jean Hauser shook his head and gently clinked glasses with her. I just have something to tell you. What? What was it that made her so serious? From tomorrow onwards, our company has a lot of things to do. I might not be able to come here every day. He was able to leave his home and come here successfully today because those people hadn't reacted yet. Once they reacted, it wouldn't be so simple. You can't come here every day? Shi Mingwan bit her lip, as if she was thinking about the meaning behind his words. Then how long will it take? Jean Hauser didn't say anything. He wasn't willing to give her a promise. It'll take some time. Shi Mingwan lowered her head and took a sip of wine. She didn't know much about wine, but now she felt that this wine was a little bitter. Yes, did you encounter any problems? Jean Hauser looked at her and shook his head gently. It's just ordinary work. I'll be fine after I'm done with this. Oh. Shi Mingwan didn't know what else to say. Let's eat. The meal was very quiet. Shi Mingwan even forgot to light the candle on the candlestick. She sat there, feeling inexplicably depressed. However, when she looked at Jean Hauser's overly handsome facial features, she suppressed the depression in her heart. It didn't matter. There were also times when she didn't care about anything when she drew. This was just right. She was going to France to compete in a while, so it was good to take this time to prepare more. Although she thought so in her heart, her face still showed a reluctant expression. The food in front of her seemed to have become tasteless. The moment Jean Hauser raised his head, he saw her expression. He picked up the wine and took a sip. He stood up and walked in front of her. He picked her up and placed her on his lap. Unhappy? No. Jean Hauser turned her face and looked at her. Shi Mingwan bit her lip. If you want to be busy, go ahead. It just so happens that I have something to do too. So, I've been very busy recently. She blinked. For some reason, she just felt that Jean Hauser wasn't telling the truth. But she didn't need him to tell the truth now. I'm going to France to compete next month. It just so happens that I need to prepare well during this period of time. Why don't you not come until I come back from France? With such a long time, it would be enough for him to finish his work, right? At this moment, her lips were suddenly kissed by Jean Hauser. He grabbed her waist and easily put his hand under the hem of her red dress. Shi Mingwan looked at him and reached out to wrap her arms around his neck. Not here. However, Jean Hausa didn't listen to her. He gently bit her lips and let go. Just here. His lips moved bit by bit to her ear. Not just here. There's also the kitchen, the living room, and the bathroom. Today we'll do it in every place. Shi Mingwan felt her face burning. The hint in his words almost made her unable to control herself. This man didn't speak much, but the things he did and the words he occasionally said always made her feel that he was so indecent. However, she soon didn't have the energy to think more. Her body was squeezed open by him bit by bit. Her consciousness began to drift away from the ninth heaven. When Jean Hausa left Shi Mingwan's apartment, he put on his disguise again. He returned to his apartment at dawn. When he entered the apartment, he was not surprised to see the few cars waiting for him at the entrance of the neighborhood last night. There was a flash of darkness in his eyes. After entering the door, he removed his disguise and took out his phone to make a call. The other party only asked someone to follow him, but he didn't ask anyone to make a move. What did that mean? Was he looking for an opportunity, or did he want to play a bigger game? No matter which it was, he would accompany him to the end. The moment the call was connected, he walked to the balcony and looked down at the few cars below. Help me do something. After hanging up the phone, his fingertips accidentally touched the photo album. There was a photo on it that had just been taken today. The faint light of the morning shone on Shi Mingwan's face. She was sleeping on the bed, her entire person peaceful and quiet. After staring at the photo for a while, Jean Hausa saved the photo into an encrypted document. He put the phone aside. Shi Mingwan didn't expect Jean Hausa to really not appear. When she woke up, he was already gone. There was still the dinner left by the two of them yesterday on the table. However, there was no trace of Jean Hausa in the room. He didn't even buy her breakfast like usual. Her body was a little sore and uncomfortable. She sat on the sofa, curled her legs and hugged her knees. She looked at the messy dining table for a long time and suddenly smiled. It wasn't like they hadn't been separated before. Why did she make it seem like they were separated forever this time? Shi Mingwan, don't be so pretentious. After a while, when Jean Hausa is done with his work, he will come to find you. In the next half a month, she didn't see Jean Hausa. He really didn't appear. Shi Mingwan's entry was almost ready. In a week, she would fly to France. Before that, Shi Mingwan went to Rong City to see Su Qingsang. Su Qingsang had been asking her to play since she went to Rong City in January, but Shi Mingwan wasn't free before. When she went to Rong City, Su Qingsang put down her work to play with her. In the evening, she also took her to meet Hu Jinyao's group of childhood friends. Unexpectedly, Jean Hausa's childhood friend, Wan Xianyang, seemed to be interested in her. Before the party ended, he kept asking for her contact information. For Su Qingsang's sake, she didn't want to refuse too obviously. She had no choice but to give him her WeChat. In the next 2 days, Wan Xianyang contacted her time and time again, saying that he wanted to be her director. Shi Mingwan had Su Qingsang to accompany her, so she pushed him away if she could. When she really couldn't push him away, she would call Su Qingsang along. Fortunately, Hu Jinyao's friends were all good. Although Wan Xianyang's intentions were obvious, he didn't go too far. This also made Shi Mingwan heave a sigh of relief. After playing in Rong City for a few days, Shi Mingwan prepared to go to France. The visa and procedures were all done. Although she was a little reluctant to part with Su Qingsang, Shi Mingwan still returned to Lin City first. After returning home, Shi Mingwan called Jean Hausa, but no one answered. She could only send a message instead. There was no reply. 2 days before going to France, Shi Mingwan went home to visit her parents. She told them that she was going to France. Although Shi Mingwan was worried, she had no reason to object to what her daughter wanted to do. Shi Mingwan accompanied her parents for a day. Before boarding the plane, she called Jean Hausa again, but no one answered. After boarding the plane, Shi Mingwan took out her phone to look at the local news while waiting for the plane to take off. However, she saw such a piece of news on the public account of a certain news outlet. Mr. Jean Hausa, a rising star in the city's technology industry, and Qin Feifei, the daughter of the Qin Corporation, held an engagement ceremony yesterday. Below was a detailed introduction about Jean Hausa's identity and Qin Feifei's identity. There was also the situation of yesterday's engagement ceremony. Finally, was a company like the Qin Corporation also going to start entering the technology field? The accompanying picture was of Jean Hausa, Qin Feifei and Qin Yongchang's face. Chapter 675. Shi Mingwan sat there with her hand tightly gripping her phone. Her heart was beating very fast. She tried her best to remain calm, but it was very difficult. Love fascinates people. Love makes people dizzy. She was blinded by love. She trusted Jean Hauser blindly. His heart felt like it had been lightly stabbed by someone and it hurt slightly. Feeling a little uncomfortable, she put down the phone and clutched her chest. Every scene and every moment after her reunion with Jean Hauser appeared in her mind one by one. She pressed on the position of her heart to calm herself down. Sure Mingwan, you are going to participate in the competition now. Let's talk about these matters of love when you come back. The plane landed. Assistant Xiao Ji and designer Tong Yen came to pick her up. This time, she was participating in the competition in the name of her studio. Apart from herself, she let little Ji and Tong Yen come over first to play the vanguard. Sister Shi, are you too tired from the flight? Xiao Ji had arrived the day before. She had come in advance and arranged a car. Now that he saw Shi Mingwan's expression wasn't good, he thought that she was too tired from the long flight. Not bad. How have you been these 2 days? Not bad. The one who spoke was Tong Yen. She had been here for 2 days and looked around. This is indeed the fashion capital. It's quite rewarding. Well, it's good that we got something. Let's go back to the hotel first. Shi Mingwan sorted out her emotions in just a few sentences. She wasn't alone. She had more important things to do right now. After getting into the car, Shi Mingwan and Tong Yen talked about the competition again. The fashion design competition was held in Paris, the fashion capital. When Tong Yen arrived, there were already quite a number of participants. It was a gathering of designers from more than a dozen countries around the world. Among the people who came, there were already those who had passed the preliminary round. Next was the semi-finals and the finals. Every match had a theme. In order to complete the work, it had to fit the theme of the competition. Then, from these works that fit the theme, the judges would pick out the 10 that they felt were the best. Then the finals would be held among these 10 people. The semi-finals and finals would last for half a month. In other words, they had to stay in France for half a month. Shi Mingwan knew about this before. Although she didn't know what the next 2 topics were, she was confident in herself. Little Ji was booked into a hotel near the competition venue. Little Ji shared a room with Tong Yen. Shi Mingwan's room was right next to theirs. After entering the door, she motioned for them to rest for a while. She wanted to take a shower and change her clothes. When the door closed, Shi Mingwan was left alone. She finally didn't have to hide her emotions anymore. Throwing herself on the bed, Shi Mingwan's mood was extremely low. The afternoon of the second day Shi Mingwan arrived was the time to announce the theme of the semi-finals. After the announcement, all the contestants would be given 3 days to submit their works. 3 days later, the judges would use 1 day to vote and announce the list of people who had passed the semi-finals. Then the submission time for the finalists was 7 days. The time given to the designer was quite short. Therefore, the organizing committee of the semi-finals did not require the contestants to design the finished product. Instead, they only required the contestants to draw the design. However, the works to be submitted in the finals included the design drawings, the source of the design, and the finished product. Of course, all the materials needed for the finals would be provided by the organizing committee. When Shi Mingwan appeared in front of Xiao Ji and Tong Yen again, she looked radiant again. She put on makeup and went to the organizing committee to fill in the form and get back the theme. The theme of this season is sweet. When she saw this theme, Shi Mingwan felt a little dizzy. She couldn't be sweet at all now. After she came to France, it wasn't that she hadn't thought of calling Jean Hauser. She wanted to ask him what was going on. How could he be engaged to another woman? But her dignity didn't allow her to ask. She retracted her thoughts and looked at the requirements on the design theme. Shi Mingwan bit her lip. Was it sweet? 3 o'clock was very tight. It was so tight that Shi Mingwan didn't have time to think about why Jean Hauser was engaged to another woman. In the past 3 days she had hardly left her room. Every day she had been drawing. After 3 days, Shi Mingwan submitted the design draft. Before the judges voted, Shi Mingwan, who was extremely tired, told Tong Yen and Xiao Ji not to disturb her and slept for the whole day. Later she was woken up by a knock on the door. She got up and looked at the time. It was already night time. She had slept for a while and her spirit had recovered quite well. It was just that she felt hungry after sleeping for too long. She was thinking about going downstairs to eat something later when there was a knock on the door again. She thought it was Xiao Ji or Tong Yen. She didn't expect to open the door and see Wan Xianyang standing outside. It's you? Shi Mingwan had just woken up. Her hair was messy and her clothes were a little wrinkled. In such a state, it was completely unsuitable for her to meet guests. She resisted the urge to close the door and took a small step back. Good evening, Mingwan. Hello. Shi Mingwan's expression didn't look that good. What's the matter? Wan Xianying stood at the door. Aren't you going to invite me in for a seat? It's not convenient. Shi Mingwan's words were a little heartless. Looking at Wan Xianying, it was obvious that he had come to look for her. Okay. It's fine. Wan Xianying wasn't angry. He placed his hand behind him. On it was a bouquet of extremely beautiful heart-shaped roses. Shi Mingwan was a little embarrassed. Wan Xianying. Flowers for a beauty. Wan Xianying forcefully handed the flowers to Shi Mingwan. You haven't eaten, have you? If you don't mind, how about having dinner with me? Shi Mingwan wanted to refuse, but Wan Xianying spoke slyly. I asked the waiter. They said that you haven't gone downstairs all day. You didn't order food either, so you should be hungry, right? Shi Mingwan's brows furrowed, but Wan Xianying seemed to know what she was thinking. I'm sorry, I made my own decision. However, the owner of this hotel is a friend of mine, so he gave me some convenience. His attitude was quite sincere. Shi Mingwan couldn't even find a reason to refuse. There's no hurry. Wan Xianying was quite gentlemanly. I'll wait for you. As he spoke, he took the initiative to take a step back. With a faint smile on his face, he raised his hand gently and gestured for Shi Mingwan to help herself. Shi Mingwan closed the door in a dilemma. She looked at the large bouquet of roses in her hand and placed it on the coffee table. After staring at the bouquet of flowers for nearly a minute, Shi Mingwan suddenly smiled. Forget it, it was just a meal. Moreover, Wan Xianying was Hu Jinyao's childhood friend. She would have a meal with him and then explain things clearly. Even if she wasn't with Zhan Haoze, she didn't have the intention to start a new relationship for the time being. He cleaned himself up as fast as he could and changed his clothes. When Shi Mingwan came out of the room, she was not surprised to see Wan Xianying's stunned gaze. How about French food? Wan Xianying suggested. Shi Mingwan felt that it was too long, but Wan Xianying smiled. You came to France to participate in the competition. I think you haven't tried authentic French food during this period of time, right? Shi Mingwan indeed hadn't. She realized that Wan Xianying was indeed a businessman. His ability to be watertight was even better than Shao Qi's. Let's go. I know there's a Michelin-starred restaurant that tastes pretty good. It's nearby. Half an hour later, Shi Mingwan and Wan Xianying sat in the restaurant. The environment in front of them was quite good. Shi Mingwan's nervous mood these few days was more or less relaxed because of this elegant environment. I came to France that year and accidentally discovered this restaurant. Later, as long as I came to France, I would definitely come. Shi Mingwan heard Wan Xianying speak French to the waiter quite well. Her French wasn't very good, so she could only understand some simple greetings. Do you come to France often? He spoke French so fluently. Often. Wan Xianying nodded and moved his body slightly closer. Do you know why? Shi Mingwan shook her head. She knew that Hu Jinyao was very rich. His friend wasn't a simple person. I told you last time that our family is in the antique business. You also know that over the years, there have been a lot of treasures in our country that have been lost outside. So every time there's an auction here, I'll come over. Shi Mingwan looked at Wan Xianying and her impression of him changed. I didn't know that you were quite patriotic. How should I put it? Those patriotic overseas Chinese are very dedicated to these things. So I'll do my best. Shi Mingwan nodded. She wasn't familiar with Wan Xianying, and Wan Xianying didn't mention what had happened before. He only talked about some of the things he had encountered at the auction. This was a field that Shi Mingwan had never come into contact with before. It was quite new to her. For a moment, she actually felt that listening to Wan Xianying's words was quite interesting. French cuisine was famous for taking a long time. Shi Mingwan didn't feel bored after eating the meal. Her nerves, which hadn't been able to relax from rushing to draw, were also relaxed a lot because of this delicious meal. After coming out of the restaurant, Shi Mingwan looked at Wan Xianying and thanked him very seriously. Wan Xianying, thank you. Thank me for what? Wan Xianying looked at her with a mischievous smile in his eyes. Thank me for treating you to a meal? You don't have to thank me. You can treat me tomorrow. Okay. Shi Mingwan didn't refuse. She should have treated him back. The weather is good today. Do you want to take a walk? Shi Mingwan wanted to refuse, but Wan Xianying made a gesture of invitation. She thought for a moment and followed beside him. Okay. The temperature in Paris was still very low at this season. It was only in the teens. Lin City was already in the 30s. But Paris was so cold. Shi Mingwan really wasn't used to it. Tightening the coat on her body, Shi Mingwan couldn't be happy when she thought that she would have to stay here for a few more days. Mingwan. Wan Xianying took off his windbreaker and was about to put it on her. Shi Mingwan was shocked and subconsciously took a step back. Wan Xianying's action of holding the coat stopped in midair. He looked at Shi Mingwan as if he knew that he was being abrupt. "Sorry, I just thought that you would be cold." "I'm not cold." Shi Mingwan felt that it was time to make things clear to Wan Xianying. Wan Xianying. She stood at the intersection and looked at his face under the street lamp. Seriously speaking, Wan Xianying wasn't bad-looking, had good qualifications and was a good person. But sometimes, feelings really couldn't be explained clearly. Wan Xianying. I know that it might not be appropriate for me to say this. You might even think that I'm being self-sentimental, but I really want to say that the two of us aren't suitable. Wan Xianying didn't expect her to be so direct. He was a little surprised, but after the surprise, there was a faint smile on his face. Are you rejecting me? I guess so. Shi Mingwan nodded. I just don't want you to waste time on me. You're not me. How do you know that I'm wasting time? But I don't like you. Shi Mingwan was very direct. Her personality was like this. If she liked him, then she liked him. If she didn't like him, then she didn't like him. Wan Xianying took a step forward and looked at Shi Mingwan's face. Before he came, he specially asked Su Qingsang to do his homework and asked a lot of people. Everything that happened today, whether it was what flowers to send or where to eat, he had carefully arranged everything. However, he didn't expect such a result. You don't like me, but I like you. I think that's enough. Maybe one day you'll like me? That's impossible. Shi Mingwan's words were quite absolute. Wan Xianying looked at her. Do you have someone you like? Yes. Do I know him? No. Wan Xianying looked at her and suddenly said, You didn't deliberately make up such a person to make me give up, did you? No. Shi Mingwan didn't want to say more. Anyway, I have someone I like. I can't forget him in a short period of time, so don't waste time on me. There's something wrong with your argument. Wan Xianying waved his hand and didn't take her words to heart at all. If I don't succeed with you in the end, it'll be a waste of time. But if I move you in the end and you get together with me, it'll be worth it. How can it be a waste of time? Wan Xianying? Shi Mingwan was speechless by his words. Alright, it's getting late. I'll send you back to rest. Wan Xianying. Let's go. Wan Xianying obviously didn't want to listen to her, so Shi Mingwan didn't say anything else. The two of them walked back along the road. Wan Xianying looked at the hotel building not far away in front of them. His attitude was different from yesterday. When they were about to reach the hotel, Shi Mingwan's foot suddenly tripped over something and she was about to fall. Wan Xianying supported her body in time. Are you okay? I'm fine. Shi Mingwan stood firm and was glad that she didn't wear high heels today. Thank you. Mingwan, you don't have to be so polite to me. Wan Xianying was serious for a while before he became a little sloppy again. Shi Mingwan seemed to be used to him being like this, so she wasn't very surprised. She stood properly and didn't refuse when Wan Xianying said that he wanted to send her back to her room. Mingwan, can I still come to see you tomorrow? I have something to do tomorrow. Tomorrow was the announcement of the shortlist. Only 10 people could be shortlisted. 1 week after the shortlist, she could bring 2 assistants to the venue specially arranged for the finalists. Whether she could be shortlisted or not, she would only know tomorrow. If she could, then she would naturally be busy next. If she couldn't, then she would really be free. It's okay. I know you're here for the competition. I can wait for you to finish the competition. Shi Mingwan didn't reply. After saying goodbye to Wan Xianying, she entered the room. She walked to the sofa and sat down. Looking at the big bouquet of roses, her emotions were very complicated. She couldn't help but think of Zhang Haoze again. During the time she was with him, Zhang Haoze didn't seem to have given her roses. She sighed in her heart. Actually, it didn't matter what he gave her. It was only at this time that she could tell that Zhang Haoze really didn't have her in his heart. Otherwise, why would he be engaged to another woman? She got up to take a shower and rest. There was a knock on the door. She thought it was Wan Xianying who had returned. Without much hesitation, she went forward and opened the door. When she saw who the tall figure outside the door was, she closed the door without hesitation. However, her movements were still a beat too slow. Before she closed the door, Zhang Haoze entered the door first. Without saying a word, Shi Mingwan began to push her away, trying to push her out. Zhang Haoze easily pulled her hands into his arms and turned around. At the same time the door was closed, her body was also pressed against the door. Shi Mingwan was anxious. She raised her foot and kicked Zhang Haoze. Zhang Haoze held her hand and wanted to block her foot. She struggled very hard, so he wasn't paying attention and was actually kicked by her. After the kick, Shi Mingwan used even more force. She raised her other foot and kicked him. Although she wasn't wearing high heels, she was wearing a pair of pointed shoes today. It was also very painful to kick someone. Zhang Haoze was kicked twice by her. When she was about to kick him for the third time, he lifted her body up. In 3 steps, he carried her body to the side of the bed and threw her down. The soft bed made Shi Mingwan's body bounce a few times. Just as she steadied herself, she raised her foot and kicked his body again. Shi Mingwan, what are you doing? Even Zhang Haoze couldn't help but press down on her body. He pressed down tightly and didn't let her move anymore. He held her hands together and raised them above his head, looking into her eyes. What are you doing? He had been very busy during this period of time. When he had some time to look for her, he realized that Shi Mingwan wasn't at home. She had gone abroad to participate in some competition. Am I messing around? Yes, if I'm messing around, you can go find someone who doesn't mess around. Shi Mingwan glared at him with a gloomy gaze. Zhang Haoze, get lost. I don't want to see you. Zhang Haoze's brows were tightly furrowed. Looking at the anger on Shi Mingwan's face, he seemed to be a little puzzled. Are you angry that I haven't come to see you during this period of time? Who's angry? Shi Mingwan didn't want to talk to him anymore. I don't have time to be angry with you. Get out of the way. I said I don't want to see you. Shi Mingwan? Shi Mingwan closed her eyes. Yes, she should have understood long ago. Look at how Zhang Haoze addressed her. He had always called her by her full name. Did he really have feelings for her? Did he really like her? Did he really love her? I'll say it again. Zhang Haoze, get out. Chapter 676. I do. Zhang Haoze didn't believe her at all. He only felt that Shi Mingwan's actions were because he hadn't come to see her for a long time and was throwing a tantrum. Call me. This person. Really? Shi Mingwan suddenly pressed the 3 numbers. After pressing it, the moment the call was connected, she spoke in fluent English. Hello, I'm at XX Hotel Room 13. Before she could finish her sentence, the phone was snatched away by Zhang Haoze. He looked at her and couldn't believe that she was serious. Shi Mingwan? Do you know what you're doing? Of course I know what I'm doing. It's someone who doesn't know what I'm doing. It's you. She glared at Zhang Haoze. She had been suppressing her uncomfortable emotions for the past few days. At this moment she didn't want to suppress them anymore. Zhang Haoze, is it fun to be two-timing? Is it fun to bully me like this? As she spoke, the great anger from when she knew that he was engaged surged in her heart. Without thinking, she raised her foot and kicked him again. Zhang Haoze, who was shocked by Shi Mingwan's words just now, was still thinking about her words. He didn't pay attention and actually let Shi Mingwan kick him. Zhang Haoze was kicked and had no choice but to leave her body. Shi Mingwan took this opportunity to quickly get up from the bed and dodge to the side. She sat up and looked at Zhang Haoze with a defensive expression and resentment. Zhang Haoze, you can't bully me like this. Perhaps because she had suppressed it for too long, Shi Mingwan's tone was filled with grievance. But very quickly she suppressed this grievance. Let bygones be bygones. But now she didn't want to continue like this. Leave. I don't want to see you. As she spoke, she pointed at the door, wanting Zhang Haoze to get lost. Zhang Haoze sat on the bed and didn't move. His brows furrowed slightly as if he had thought of something. Two-timing? Oh. At this time he was still playing dumb. Shi Mingwan nodded and went forward to take the phone. After taking the phone, she quickly retreated, as if she wasn't afraid that Zhang Haoze would pounce on her. She turned on the phone and found yesterday's news. She directly placed it in front of Zhang Haoze. On the phone screen, Zhang Haoze stood with Chen Feifei, while Chen Yongchang stood beside Chen Feifei. The 3 of them smiled brightly. The accompanying article was the news of their engagement. Shi Mingwan's gaze was slightly cold as she stared straight at Zhang Haoze. Now that things had come to this, what else could he say? He said that there was nothing between him and Chen Feifei. He asked her to give him time. She believed him, gave him time, and the result? Zhang Haoze's eyes darkened when he saw the photo. He knew about this photo. He also knew about this news, but he didn't expect Shi Mingwan to see it. Nothing to say? If you have nothing else to say, then leave. She didn't want to hear it from him either. It was true that she longed for love and wanted to be with him. But she didn't want to be looked down upon. She didn't want to be a shameful mistress. Even if according to the chronological order she should have arrived first. She casually threw her phone aside. Shi Mingwan still had things to do tomorrow, so she didn't want to waste her time with Zhang Haoze. Leave. Zhang Haoze got up and got out of bed. Shi Mingwan thought that he was going to leave, but he walked to her side and hugged her. Zhang Haoze. He didn't want to use this trick all the time. Shi Mingwan struggled up and raised her foot to kick Zhang Haoze again. He dodged this kick, and Shi Mingwan used her elbow to hit his abdomen. She heard a muffled groan. She didn't stop. She didn't use much strength. What was he doing? However, when she saw Zhang Haoze bend down, she thought he was pretending. Zhang Haoze, go out. I don't want to see you. Zhang Haoze didn't say anything. His hand kept covering his abdomen, and his face seemed to be in pain. Shi Mingwan was still calm at first, but when she saw that he was really in pain, she couldn't hold back the coldness on her face anymore. Stop pretending. If you're fine, go out. I don't want to see you. Zhang Haoze shook his head. He reached out to hug her. Only then did Shi Mingwan remember the situation in front of her and pushed him hard again. He was pushed back a step by her, and his back hit the edge of the table in the hotel room. Shi Mingwan's lips moved. She wanted to say that she should be careful, but she thought that she didn't have much strength at all. He must be pretending. But when she saw the blood flowing out from between Zhang Haoze's fingers, she was shocked and went forward without thinking. Are you hurt? Zhang Haoze raised his head and looked at her. Ignoring the blood on his body, he reached out and hugged her. Zhang Haoze, you. What was he doing at a time like this? I'm not engaged to her. Although everyone thought that way, this engagement was the wishful thinking of the Qin father and daughter. In the past half a month, there had been frequent movements. Some were aimed at him and some were aimed at Qin Feifei. It was fine to target Qin Feifei, but there was only one. After all, Qin Feifei's uncle was quite powerful in Xi province. However, there were many movements aimed at him. Before he decided to come to France, half of it was because he did it on purpose, and the other half was because he wanted to divert the other party's attention. Therefore, when the other party came looking for him, he didn't avoid it. Instead, he directly accepted the other party's provocation. He deliberately took the knife in his stomach. The strength and direction were calculated accurately. It wouldn't be fatal, but he would suffer a little. Sure enough, after he was injured, the other party's movements immediately stopped. He probably didn't expect him to be so weak, that he would be injured so easily. It was also because he was injured that the other party's movements stopped. That was why he had the time to come to France to look for Shi Mingwan. However, he didn't expect Shi Mingwan to have such a reaction when he came. Where are you hurt? Shi Mingwan didn't want to care about whether he was engaged or not. She remembered that he was very skilled. Ordinary people shouldn't be able to hurt him, so how did he get injured? It's a small injury. Since it's a small injury, let's go. Shi Mingwan retreated from his arms and didn't look at him at all. Get out. Zhang Haoze let go of his hand and looked at his abdomen. He came to France and was wearing a casual suit. Inside was a beige shirt. The shirt was already stained with blood, and blood leaked out from between his fingers. Shi Mingwan turned her face away and wanted to say, "Get out," again. However, her absent-minded mind took a step forward and walked in front of Zhang Haoze. She bent down and took Zhang Haoze's hand away. She unbuttoned his shirt. She saw that there was a circle of gauze wrapped around his abdomen. The gauze was now completely red. She pursed her lips into a straight line and stared at the wound for a long time. She turned around and pressed the front desk to ask them to send the first aid kit up. When the other party asked if he needed a doctor, she thought about it and agreed. When the doctor came, she asked Zhang Haoze to lie down. Don't stand. Lie down. The doctor will be here later. You're not going to chase me away? Zhang Haoze's words made Shi Mingwan look sideways. She stared at his face for a long time and finally shook her head. After the doctor sees your injury, you can leave. 1-1. Zhang Haoze's address made Shi Mingwan's heart tremble. It seemed that ever since the two of them got together, he hadn't called her name like this. I'm not engaged to Qin Feifei. Shi Mingwan lowered her head in disbelief. Zhang Haoze took 2 steps forward to approach her, but she raised her hand. Don't move. Lie down. The worry in her eyes was too obvious. Zhang Haoze looked at her for a while, then finally listened to her and lay down on the bed. His hand was still pressed on the wound. It was no longer bleeding. Soon the hotel waiter brought a doctor up. Shi Mingwan was worried that Zhang Haoze's injury was too serious and that she wouldn't be able to handle it well. When the doctor arrived, she heaved a sigh of relief. The doctor untied the gauze on Zhang Haoze's waist. Only then did Shi Mingwan see that there was a wound about 5 centimeters long on his abdomen. The wound had already been stitched up, but it was still bleeding faintly. She wasn't sure if it was because she had pushed him just now or something else. At this moment, her eyes were a little red. The doctor treated Jean House's wound again and bandaged it. Finally, he gave some instructions on what to take note of. What surprised Shi Mengwan was that Jean House could actually speak fluent French. This made her unable to help but look sideways. After sending the doctor away, Shi Mengwan asked the waiter to change the blood-stained bedsheets. She looked at Jean House and wanted to chase him away. Jean House had already laid down on the bed first. Shi Mengwan took 2 steps forward. Jean House, you can't sleep here. You, Wan. Jean House reached out and held her hand. He looked at her with his usual cold face, but there was a hint of gentleness and fatigue in his eyes. I'm very tired. During this period of time, apart from those people who wanted to deal with him in the open and in the dark, he had also suffered a lot of interference in his work. Whether it was in Lin City or Qing City, he still had a lot of things to do. However, because he hadn't seen her for a long time, he ignored the injuries on his body and flew for more than 10 hours to see her. He didn't rest on the plane. Instead, he dealt with some very important business matters first. This time he was really tired. Wan, let me sleep for a while. When he said this, Shi Mengwan finally noticed that other than the injuries on his body, there was a faint shadow under his eyes. Her lips moved. She wanted herself to be more heartless and harden her heart, but she couldn't do it no matter what. She could only watch as Jean House closed his eyes. His hand was still holding her hand. Sleep with me for a while, okay? Jean House didn't even open his eyes. He just held Shi Mengwan's hand and didn't let go. Shi Mengwan stood by the bed and looked at Jean House, who seemed to have lost a little weight. She didn't sleep as he wished. Instead, she withdrew her hand and took a step back. Jean House looked at her with half-opened eyes. At this moment, Jean House unexpectedly made Shi Mengwan feel fragile. Fragile? How was that possible? That was definitely not an emotion that should appear on Jean House. In her heart, this person was similar to a robot. How could he be fragile? Wan? He called her again. This time, Shi Mengwan decided not to be affected by him. She turned around and went straight to the bathroom. Her footsteps were very fast. After entering the bathroom, she quickly closed the door. She placed her hands on the edge of the sink and stared at her face in the mirror. Don't be soft-hearted. Don't believe it. That man was already someone else's now. If you were soft-hearted, it would be equivalent to harming yourself again. No, absolutely not. Shi Mengwan was in a bad mood. She took more than 10 minutes to take a shower than usual before coming out. She was wrapped in a hotel bathrobe. When she saw Jean House, his eyes were tightly closed. His breathing was long and balanced as if he had really fallen asleep. Shi Mengwan walked to the bedside and stood still, staring at Jean House's face. Many thoughts flashed through her mind, such as shaking him awake and telling him to leave. Or perhaps she simply went to get another room. However, when she saw the injury on Jean House's abdomen, she temporarily put down those thoughts and suppressed them. She closed her eyes and finally lay down beside him helplessly. She stared at the side of Jean House's face, unable to calm down. Shi Mengwan thought that she wouldn't be able to sleep, and she also thought that she would toss and turn for the whole night. But in reality, she slept very soundly. No matter how much she didn't want to deny it, she couldn't escape the reality in her heart. Where Jean House was, she could always sleep more peacefully. Early morning. Shi Mengwan woke up. When she opened her eyes, she saw Jean House's enlarged face in front of her. He was staring at her. At the same time that she woke up, he lowered his head and kissed her lips. Shi Mengwan subconsciously avoided him. She looked at him and moved her body to the side. Jean House supported himself with one hand on the bed. He looked at her movements and moved a little in her direction. Shi Mengwan quickly got up and sat 2 arms away from him. Her gaze shifted slightly to prevent herself from looking at him. Your injury should be fine now. You can leave. Shi Mengwan didn't plan to continue like this. Her body moved, but before she could leave, she was already pressed down by Jean House. In the next second, she was pressed down by him. Wan, I'm not engaged. He looked into her eyes and said very seriously. His eyes were deep and focused. To her, they were fatally attractive. She knew that what he said might not be the truth, and she didn't intend to believe him. She wanted to struggle, but when she thought that Jean House was injured, she could only stop. Really? Does it have anything to do with me? Shi Mengwan forced herself to turn her face away. Who are you to me? Whether you're engaged or not, and which woman you're with, you don't need to tell me. Jean House's brows furrowed slightly. Wan, don't call me. Shi Mingwan seemed to have made up her mind. She turned around and looked at him. Zhan Haoze, you said that you're not engaged? Yes. You said that you have nothing to do with Qin Feifei? Yes. Then tell me, who am I to you? Zhan Haoze paused for a moment and looked at Shi Mingwan's delicate and beautiful face. He said 3 words very slowly, girlfriend. I'm your girlfriend? Yes. Was she not? Okay. You said I'm your girlfriend. Shi Mingwan suddenly reached out to hold his face and looked into his eyes very seriously. Then do you dare to publicize our relationship? Publicize it to the entire Lin city. Tell everyone that you're my man and I'm your woman? Do you dare? Do you dare to let everyone know that I'm your girlfriend? Chapter 677. In a quiet room, 2 men were lying on the same bed. One was on top and the other was on bottom. The posture was ambiguous, but the atmosphere was completely different. Zhan Haoze didn't expect Shi Mingwan to ask such a question. The air suddenly became silent. He still had an injury on his abdomen. After supporting himself like this for a long time, it caused a slight throbbing pain. His expression changed slightly because of the pain. In Shi Mingwan's eyes, this change directly became proof that he didn't want to admit his identity. Shi Mingwan sneered. It seemed that she was no exception to this result. She let go of her hand and gently pushed him to the side. She was about to get up when Zhan Haoze grabbed her hand again. 1-1. Let go. It's not what you think. Zhan Haoze rarely explained to others. His brothers had been with him for a long time. There were many things that he didn't need to say or explain. They would directly execute them and very few people would question his words. Then what is it? Tell me, I'll listen. Shi Mingwan waited for him to explain. Even if she really wanted to be with him, she hoped that she could understand his thoughts. Even if they couldn't be together, she hoped that the breakup could be done cleanly. Zhan Haoze had been supporting himself for a long time. At this moment he simply sat up and pulled her to sit up with him. His movements affected his wound. He snorted in a very low voice. Shi Mingwan seemed to have only realized at this moment that Zhan Haoze was injured. She turned her face away and forced herself not to soften and not to give in. 1-1, I can't disclose our relationship for the time being. Shi Mingwan sneered and turned her face away. She felt that it was a matter of course. She knew that this person was just saying it to sound nice. I'm sorry. Zhan Haoze rarely said sorry to anyone. There were even fewer women who could make him say sorry. Zhan Haoze thought of Zhan Kuan, the Zhan family in Qing City, and his current situation. He closed his eyes. Qin Feifei has heart disease. She can't stand stimulation. I owe her father a debt of gratitude. So, I can't leave the Qin family for the time being. Shi Mingwan turned around and looked at Zhan Haoze. She just stared at him. She has heart disease. She likes you and wants to be engaged to you, so you agreed? I didn't agree. In fact, ever since Qin Feifei had a relapse, Qin Yongchang had been wanting them to get engaged. But he didn't agree. He didn't want to agree either. But later Qin Feifei was almost attacked. Qin Feifei was scared half to death because of this. Her heart wasn't good to begin with, so Qin Yongchang decided to get them engaged. But perhaps she was afraid that he would be unhappy if he knew. Qin Yongchang didn't tell him. Instead, he said that the Qin Corporation was holding an anniversary meeting. The Qin Corporation's anniversary celebration was around the same time. As the general manager of the Qin Corporation, it was impossible for Zhan Haoze not to attend. When he went to Juanxia, he found out that Qin Yongchang and Qin Feifei actually wanted them to get engaged to him, and they didn't reveal any news between them. At that time, it was impossible for Zhan Haoze to leave just like that, so when Qin Yongchang asked him to go on stage, he could only go up. After that, Qin Yongchang said a lot of good things to him in private. After explaining for a long time, he finally said that if he really didn't want to, he could wait until Qin Feifei's body got better and then break off the engagement with her. As for the current situation, it was better to let Qin Feifei rest well and recuperate. This way, even if Zhan Haoze didn't agree, it would still cause the fact that they were engaged. But in his heart he didn't agree. 1-1, it's not what you think between me and her. I understand it's not what I think. It's just that you want to repay her kindness. At this point, Shi Mingwan sneered. But Zhan Haoze, the Qin family is kind to you. Qin Feifei has heart disease. What does that have to do with me? Since you pity her so much and can't bear to part with her, then you can go to her side and take good care of her. Why are you looking for me? 1-1, do you know what your behavior is called? Shi Mingwan said bluntly. A scumbag. Shi Mingwan. Zhan Haoze looked at her, his face full of disapproval. Shi Mingwan smiled, but that smile didn't reach her eyes at all. Aren't you a scumbag? You're afraid of hurting Qin Feifei, but you're still hanging on to me? Do I owe you? Why should I swallow my anger like this? Or is it that in your heart I'm so easy to deceive? That I can let you do whatever you want? I didn't mean that. But you've already done it. Shi Mingwan's face was full of mockery and she didn't give in at all. Aren't you afraid of hurting Qin Feifei while hanging on to me? Zhang Haoze looked at Shi Mingwan and didn't explain. In fact, he couldn't explain. Because of the real reason he couldn't let her know at all. I'm not afraid of hurting Qin Feifei. I just don't want to be an ungrateful person. The Qin family is kind to me. Although I don't like Qin Feifei, I don't want anything to happen to her. Yes, you can't let anything happen to her, so you can let something happen to me. Shi Mingwan couldn't take it anymore. She turned around and was about to get off the bed when Zhang Haoze held her hand. Don't do this. Then what do you want me to do? Shi Mingwan shook his hand off. Accept the truth? Accept the fact that you have to take care of another woman's emotions when you're with me? I didn't. Don't say you didn't mean that. Just tell me directly, how long do you plan to take care of her? How long do you plan to hide our relationship? Zhang Haoze didn't avoid this question. Instead, he looked at Shi Mingwan very seriously. It won't be too long. Give me some time, I'll solve it. Unfortunately, I don't believe you. Zhang Haoze's face darkened because of her words. Shi Mingwan didn't want to continue. She left the bed and stood on the other side of the bed. Alright, that's it. Zhang Haoze, you go your own way and I'll go my own way. He liked to take care of Qin Feifei, so he would take care of her. She wasn't going to accompany him anymore. She still had to go to the organizing committee to see the results of the semi-finals today, so she didn't have time to waste with Zhang Haoze here. After entering the bathroom, she washed up and changed her clothes. Shi Mingwan came out and prepared to leave. Zhang Haoze stood up at this moment. All right, Zhang Haoze. He had already said a lot today. Don't say any more. Either you break up with me and we won't have anything to do with each other. Or you stay away from Qin Feifei. Go back to Lin City and announce that you're not engaged. Everything is a misunderstanding. How about that? Zhang Haoze's face darkened. At this time he couldn't do that. While he was silent and hesitant, Shi Mingwan had already picked up her bag and walked to the door. When she was about to leave, Zhang Haoze stood in front of her again. Zhang Haoze, I'll say it again. Either you do what you promised me or you leave this place. There is no third option. Her hand rose and she thought about pushing him away. The moment she raised her hand, she thought of the tattoo on his body. Gritting her teeth, she walked right past him and left. This time, Zhang Haoze didn't stop her. When she got out of the door, she was relieved, but at the same time she felt a sense of loss. She believed what Zhang Haoze said was true. He was such a proud person that he disdained to lie. But so what if what he said was true? What could it change? Qin Feifei had heart disease and needed him to take care of her. She was not in good health. Did he have to take care of her all the time? Take care of him 1 day at a time and 1 year at a time. He really valued relationships. Unfortunately, she didn't want to waste her time with him. Sister Shi, you're up so early? Just as she went out, Xiao Ji and Tong Yen had already woken up and were here. Sister Shi, are you very nervous? I'm not nervous. Shi Mingwan shook her head. Compared to what she was worried about, there was really nothing to be nervous about. If we can pass, then we'll pass. If we can't, then we'll just play for a few days as a vacation. Thinking about it this way, there's nothing bad about it. Sister Shi, your mentality is really good. Xiao Ji almost wanted to worship her. Shi Mingwan smiled, and her depressed mood was suppressed again. Let's go. What surprised Shi Mingwan was that she actually passed the semi-finals. Among the 10 finalists, she was in the 9th place, as it was said that the rankings were not separated. This was really great news for her. Xiao Ji and Tong Yen were extremely happy. The two of them hugged her and congratulated her repeatedly. Shi Mingwan smiled. This was what they meant by frustrated in love, but successful in career, right? She passed the semi-finals. Next, the 10 people who passed were ready to participate in the finals. We've already prepared the venue for the finals. For the next 7 days, you need to stay in the place we've prepared. You'll draw here, make the finished product, and walk until you've finished your work. Because the venue is a little far, you can go back and pack your things now. Gather here in the afternoon. We'll have a car to send you to the venue. The people from the organizing committee explained the rules again. Shi Mingwan, Xiao Ji, and the others all memorized it very seriously. After memorizing it, They decided to go back to the hotel to pack their luggage first and then come over to gather in the afternoon. Shi Mingwan, Xiaoji and the others returned to the hotel. Xiaoji stood at the door of the room and looked at Shi Mingwan. Sister Shi, do you want us to help you pack? No need. Shi Mingwan shook her head. You guys go pack your things. We'll go out for a meal later. Okay, Sister Shi. It's still early anyway. We can come back after dinner and rest for a while. Shi Mingwan nodded. Now, she just didn't know where the organizing committee would arrange for them. After entering the door, Shi Mingwan thought that Zhang Haoze had already left. She didn't expect him to still be in the room. Seeing that he hadn't left yet, Shi Mingwan's expression didn't look too good. Why haven't you left yet? Zhang Haoze stood up. Wan, don't call me. Shi Mingwan took a step back. Just as she was about to open the door and let him leave, someone knocked on the door first. Shi Mingwan was shocked. She stood at the door and wasn't in a hurry to open it. Instead, she looked out through the peephole. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.